Well, and so many people have turned, which they normally have done traditionally in the past. When there's some issue or problem, people tend to stay home more. Gardening picks up, and the whole thing goes. It didn't happen in 2008 because people were losing their homes, so they wouldn't have a place to garden. But now in this one, it's everybody that I know, all the hort um, industries that I know of are just slammed. They're going gangbusters because everybody is buying materials, they're using them, they're growing materials of their own. It's
Mhm.
amazing.
Well, and the housing didn't stop. The housing building didn't stop. The building trades were continued on, and as somebody with a daughter who's looking to purchase something, um, the market, at least here, is just as strong as it's ever been.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, all the new home construction still is going in. So the big wholesale nurseries that rely on that, those were the ones who were in 2008, housing just stopped. That's a huge part of the
Well,
nursery
exactly. Yeah,
space.
yeah. Well, and the economic crisis happened because of a housing issue in the first place, and so a lot of people lost their homes. Housing industry came to a halt, and so did gardening. I mean, it was the toughest time for most of our the people that were doing the growing. So, but it sort of has warmed my heart to see so many people getting back to this and spending more time and starting to grow their own food. So it's really great.
I agree. I agree. But uh, I always, when I dig up plants, I bring them into the arboretum, to pot up for giveaways, sales, whatever, And one of my neighbors, I live at the end of a cul-de-sac, and one of my neighbors came walking by, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was talking. She said, "What, if you ever have anything extra, let me know." And so I had already dug up this huge bucket of iris, way more than Tim wanted to pot up, probably. Uh, so I was like, "Oh," and so I grabbed out a bunch of iris and threw them in a tray, and then I had some bulbs that I hadn't gotten in the ground that I put out there, and some other stuff that I had dug up, and I just put a sign out, free plants. And um, it's funny, people would come by and take one little iris division while I was out there gardening. I went inside for a couple of hours, and it must have gone out over next door or something, that there were free plants, because I came back and it's all gone. About 2 hours later, kept coming by with thank you bottles of wine and things like that. I was like, I'm gonna keep the the wine cellars stocked by giving away plants this way. I love it.
Yeah. I'm going to fill my coffee cup back up, and I'll be right back.
All right. 5 on YouTube as well. It's pretty cool. Um, I'm doing well. This is this is perfect timing. I'm gonna 2 hours here, and then by then the garden will be a little bit more dried out. I hope, and we can gardening at home. Put some more bulbs out for people. Hey, Rebecca from Brunswick County, glad to have you. Mountains of Western North Carolina. That's my favorite part of the country, part of the state. I love the mountains. Except you can't grow as much there. And all these folks expect it to snow tonight. perfect snow is one that comes down, covers everything, can't see the tips of the grasses, just gets above that, and then melts away by 4:30 in the afternoon.
I'll tell you, I was visiting my family in Texas, down on Padre Island, and Christmas Eve, this was a few years ago, it started snowing. Snowing, okay, halfway down to Mexico. So it snowed, and then the morning snow was covered everything, and then by 2 o'clock it was 70 degrees, and it just all went away. So we had snow on Christmas Eve and Christmas morning, and then it was gone. It was like you couldn't have asked for it to be like you said, a snow for a little while and then just get rid of it.
Yeah, that's my favorite snow story. And I know
Oh shit.
Mark.
Looks like Mark's.
Chris, you froze it.
I froze too.
Yeah, you froze it.
Yeah, Chris, you and Tim, everybody's okay. I mean, okay, all right.
Mark now disappeared.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Well, no one can hear me still, right? Or am I good?
You're good. Yeah, I can hear you.
For a moment there, I thought we lost internet or something, but I wonder what's up with Mark.
I bet it's his computer because the slideshow's down.
Yeah, I'll walk into his office in just a little bit.
On the YouTube chat, we have a hello from Louisville, Kentucky.
Wow.
Oh, up to 89, 91, 82. Starting to arrive.
Good morning, you guys. All together, we already have more people than would fit in the auditorium at the Arboretum if we were doing it in person. We have 59 on YouTube, and what do we have, 99?
100 now on Zoom.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. I'm not turning my camera on. It's a Saturday, and I have a little bit of bedhead going on, but I'm the membership and volunteer coordinator at the Arboretum, and I'll be monitoring both chats, and I can answer any questions if anybody has any. But I hope you have a great morning. I'm looking forward to it.
Mark has stopped by. He is having technical difficulties. He says that it's still showing the slideshow on his end, but he noticed something was going on. I've suggested that he do a quick reboot.
Morning, Dinesha.
Good morning. I am so pleased to be in such a awesome lineup of people, and just as I keep saying to Chris, so amazed how many people signed up. You know, February is really an awesome time to start talking about these things. I think everyone's just hungry to get outside.
I don't know if you were here when Catherine just mentioned that we already have more people than our auditorium would fit joining us right now.
That's just amazing.
Already present.
Wow.
Hey, Denisha.
Good morning. Good morning. What a nice background, Mark. I'm still working on mine. I just moved offices, and a girlfriend of mine yesterday was helping me get my camera right. So if y'all don't mind, I'm just going to fuss with it. She's going to be mad at me. There we go. She placed some plants there in my corner virtually. So it was pretty funny because she was like, no, a little more to the left. May I ask you guys very quickly before we're formally on, I just published this book. Mark knows about it. I wondered if it was all right if I just snuck one slide in. I'm not planning to pimp the book too much, but I want to do a book giveaway. And I wondered if it would be okay if I just slid one slide in that just said, hey, if you liked what you saw today, let me know. And I'm happy to do, my publisher's willing to give away 3 books.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, for sure. Please, please, please.
We're hoping to invite you and Ann over one day for a book launch.
I think
Do a live thing.
might even be working on that on the schedule, but we're counting on it.
Yeah.
So excited. I wish it were in person. I miss people so much.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and we've had Ann do this same gardening in the South, and she was fantastic.
Oh, always.
Of course, she could have done all 3 slots. I think she tried to tell everybody everything. It was fantastic. Everybody loved it. But yeah, I think it would be great to have both of y'all going together. That would be a lot of fun. The energy would be a lot of fun.
Well, sign us up, you guys. We're ready.
Excellent.
And again, my publisher's, happy to give away free books. And who doesn't love free books?
I know. I'm going to share screen because we have some stuff going on in the background. Just some information. But if anybody needs to do anything while that's happening, I can always stop sharing.
Well, just the number of people on YouTube have exceeded our capacity. I mean, on Zoom have exceeded the capacity of the auditorium.
I'm frankly glad that I won't see all 600. That would probably intimidate me.
No. And for all of our participants who are already on, please, if you have a question that you'd like to ask any of the JCRA staff or the speakers, put that in the Q&A, and you can do that beforehand. We can answer questions beforehand. We're happy to. And if you do it in the Q&A, then everybody, all the other guests, participants can see those as well. If you have a comment that doesn't really need an answer, if somebody talks about something and you agree with them and just want to say, yes, I love that plant, or the bees cover my mountain mint, it's the best pollinator plant ever, you can put that in the chat, and that way people can see that as well. I saw a couple people had their hands up, so please feel free to ask those questions via the Q&A. And if you're on the chat while we're before we're going, love to know where you're joining us from. We love seeing where across the state people are joining us.
Or even not in the state.
Or not in the state, exactly. Yeah. Sure.
Even better.
We've had weekly programs where we've had people from what was it, Belgium to Oregon.
Oh, they're coming in. How exciting.
Yeah, love them. Dunloring. Wow, I've been there. It was a long time ago. Yeah, see the master gardeners coming in. So much fun. Wilmington. Too much fun. What was that? Urban herbs and microgreens. Like that. Yeah, so in our chat book, and we'll post this several times in our chat, we've got a link to our guest book, and we would love for people to go to there and sign into that. We love knowing, really being able to keep track of where people are coming from. It helps us with programming. I've seen folks from Wilmington and Morehead City and things like that. I spent a decade gardening on the coast. So if we know we're getting a lot of folks from the coast, then maybe we'll, do a gardening with near salt water, that kind of thing, salt tolerant plants. So it really helps us to know where our folks are coming from across the state, across the country, around the world. You never know. Somebody in Antwerp may want to know how to garden in central North Carolina. And there's a question, the cameras are off. Yes, for this webinar, all participant cameras and microphones are off and can't be turned on. So you can do whatever you want. Dogs can bark, whatever, and it won't show up. So yeah, find that link in our in the chat for the guest book, and please sign in. We love that. Yes, to gardening on the coast. Gardening on the coast is great as long as you don't get inundated with salt water. Oh, look at that. So YouTube is filling up as well. And we have somebody already who just moved from Texas and is trying to plan her garden. And I don't know what part of Texas they came from, but we're pretty similar to the green side of Texas. That green third of Texas. It's the brown 2/3 that we're a lot different from. Look at this. This is great. I love all these master gardeners. That's really exciting. And our local folks from Raleigh. Look at this. Currituck, Asheville, Onslow, Wilmington, Raleigh, Transylvania, Fayetteville, Wayne. Yeah, everybody, you got to sign that guest book because I think with this crowd, we may actually hit all 100 counties in the state.
And Mark, I might need to borrow your guest book for the book giveaway.
I was thinking that was crossed my mind that might be perfect. Yeah, Denisha might have a book giveaway. So if that guest book may be where she picks somebody from. Oh, that's true, Darla. I hadn't thought about those folks who have a second home on the coast. That's a good point. That a lot of our local folks would be interested in the gardening on the coast. Will the slides be available later? Yes, we'll keep putting the slides will come up between speakers, and we can have them up at the end. I'll slow them down after we get started. Can folks get on YouTube? Yes. There's that question there. How do folks join YouTube? Looking at Chris or Catherine or somebody, what do people need to do? Anything in particular?
Just put the link in the chat.
Okay, there you go. If you want to join, the link's in the chat. You can share that with folks who can't get in here. With the guest book, we'll keep posting that link in the guest book. And just as a reminder, if you're joining us for this webinar, your camera and your microphone will be off the entire time. Put comments in the chat field, but questions in the Q&A. So we make sure we get those. So YouTube link is in the chat. Oh, moved here from the San Francisco Bay Area. Ooh, You can grow anything out there. You just can't afford any space to plant any of those things. I was told that when you know, kind of that area, Silicon Valley and San Francisco area, if you were going to build a house, you just bought the property and they threw in the house for free because the property is so expensive. Can't grow anything. All right. So Gary, I see your question there about composition of raised bed soil. Dr. Fontenot is going to be talking about building soil, and I think he's gonna really answer a lot of that question. If not, we will come back and re-ask us that, and we'll revisit it after the talk. But I think Bill's going to get you some great information about that. All right. We have got a lot of folks on. This is so much fun. Oh, San Francisco Bay Area, they can't grow anything that needs a long hot season. You know, a friend of mine in Washington State built a greenhouse, a glass house, just so he can grow tomatoes out there because he can't grow tomatoes. So when I email with him or text with him, sometimes he'll show me his weeds, you know, the Himalayan blue poppies, and say, these stupid things seeding around everywhere. And I say, yeah, I know, I wish I could grow those, but you know, my BLT sure is delicious. Move the chat. Yes, you can move the chat. You can just, if you just click on the top bar of the chat, you can slide it over to the side or down to the bottom or wherever you want it. Okay. Chris, did you say it's time to start?
It's time to start. It's all yours, Mark.
Okay. There's so many people jumping in that didn't even watch that time.
I wasn't.
All right. What's that? You either?
I said I wasn't either. I was helping people in my email trying to get in.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We are thrilled to have all of y'all here with us. This has been a large group, and I know folks will be joining us through the morning as they wake up, I suppose. Couple of housekeeping things I mentioned before, but for those of you who joined since, in the chat, we do have a link to a guest book. We do hope everybody will go to that guest book and just let us know where they're coming from. It's really helpful for us for deciding future programming, and maybe a benefit from you. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Those of you, if you have questions during the talks or between them after, please put those in the Q&A. Click on the Q&A and type your question in. Some of those questions will be answered as we go along by the JC Raulston Arboretum horticulture staff. The questions that need to get to the speakers, we will ask we'll ask them those at the end of their talks. They will also stay with us to the end of the program and answer more questions there. So make sure you hang on for that. If you just have a comment, something like, I love that plant, or that works for me, go ahead and just type that in the chat, and people can see that there. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. We are really excited about this Gardening in the South symposium series. We really aim this for folks who want to become better gardeners in the South and deal with some of our peculiar conditions down here. Folks who are new to gardening, especially folks who are new to the South, who've moved here from other places. We really want y'all to be better gardeners. The key to being a better gardener is to deal with your soil. Soil is the number one thing. If you can do only one thing to be a better gardener, that's going to be improving your soil. And we have no better person to talk about soils than Dr. Bill Fontenot from here at NC State University, where he's been a professor of horticulture for 42 years. He teaches courses in plant growth and development and greenhouse production. But his research expertise and where he really shines in terms of helping growers become more successful is in horticultural substrates, urban soils, like what you have in your garden. He's been the technical advisor for the National Mulch and Soil Council for 15 years and developed the quality program for all consumer potting soils, soil additives, and mulches sold in the United States. So I think it is safe to say that Dr. Fontenot knows what he's talking about when he is talking about soils. So Bill, thank you so much for having us. Bill has given talks before, and as somebody who has done this professional horticulture for 2.5 decades, I got to tell you, every time I hear Bill give a talk, I come away with things that I can do to improve how I garden. So I'm really excited to share him with you today. Bill, turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to try to get this thing started. So bear with us for just a moment. Okay. Can you guys see my stuff now?
We can.
So, okay. And see if we can. Let's go. Come on. Oh, okay. All right. So we're up. We're good. All right. Thank you. Well, thanks, Mark. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to gather with people here at the JCRA. Talking to people that come into the JCRA is some of the most rewarding things that I do because everyone is so interested in what's going on. They just really are, and so it's great to be able to do that. So today we're going to talk about improving your soils, but one of the things about gardening in the South is such a wonderful place just to garden in general. And there's nothing that, in my mind, that helps you do that better than to have a really great soil to do that. It inspires you to grow things that you might not want to do. Just as a moment, we are at the JCRA, and I just want to mention JC Raulston. Many of you that have had the opportunity to actually work with JC remember JC like this. Just a wonderful fellow. I remember JC like this because he was one of my advisors for my PhD committee, and I was one of the very first grad students for JC that he ever had. So one of the claims to fame I have is that I was one of JC's students. And he imparted so much wonderful things about gardening. As Mark was saying, I've done this for a very long time. Teaching has always been a wonderful thing for me back in the day, but what I also inherited from being around JC is a need to go to places and see for myself. And he was a wonderful traveler, and he inspired me to do the same thing. And so we've been to many different locations and many different locales looking at horticulture and particularly soils-based information for just a large number of years. I've been to about 26 different countries so far in my work, and it's amazing how similar most people are when it comes to gardening. It's amazing. And Mark already mentioned work with the Mulch and Soil Council and certified soils and things like this. So there's just been a large amount of effort that we've put in over the years to looking at soils and soil-related issues. Okay, so if we're talking about soils, the Soil Conservation Service, if you want to find out what the soil is that you have in your area, you can go to the Soil Conservation Service and look it up. You can find out what you've got. They have done wonderful work over the years of looking at soils and mapping where the soils are in the U.S. And there are literally 33,000 different designations about soils. 33,000 types, all right? And in fact, in Wake County, there are 22 soil types listed. 22 soil types in the state, just in Wake County itself. Now, if we were sitting together in a room by ourselves, I would ask you, hey, who here knows what kind of soil type you have? Now, I will also bet you that most of you, no matter where you live, no matter what soil type is listed for your particular location, you may not have that soil type. That may not be what you're doing. And that's not because it wasn't mapped properly, it's because of what's been done to the soils. All right. People that have trouble with soil, a lot of people think that it's their fault, that they're just not what's going on. But the soil is not exactly what we think it is. So let me give you an example. Here's what a soil profile looks like of a natural native soil. And the soil portion is really above this red line. That's the soil part. And it's about a foot deep, roughly. The top part is the O or horizon, they call it the horizon, with sort of level spots. It's about 2 to 3 inches deep, and that's where the organic matter is. The area below that, the A horizon, that's topsoil. That is soil. That is what you plant in, that's what you grow in, and that's what we all think we have. Okay? So that's what we're looking for, and that's the part that's been classified in all of these different soil series that people talk about. All right? So, what soil do you have? Well, it's problematic. And it's problematic because soil in itself takes a very, very long time to make. All right? And of course, we've got this O and A horizon, okay? How long do you think it took to make that soil? How long do you think it took nature to do this? Well, if through natural weathering and the like, it takes about 10,000 years to build soil. 10,000 years for nature to actually build soil. So soil didn't start showing up until after the rocks were here, and all soil is basically just smaller and smaller pieces of rock. And all mineral soil is just rock. That's all it is, just little tiny pieces of rock. And it's the blend of those materials, the O and A horizons, that actually make soil. The problem we have in urban areas is that soils and construction do not play well together. They don't get along. You cannot build on real soil. It doesn't hold up. It shifts too much. And so soil and construction don't get along. So the first thing you do if you're building something is you strip off the soil. You literally take a front end loader and you push the soil up. And hopefully, if you're lucky, they will push that topsoil over to the side, leave it there, construct whatever they need to construct, and then push it back. That would be the ideal thing to do. And there are many places that this does happen. But in the construction business, there is something else that tends to go on. This piled up pile of topsoil is actually worth money. And many construction or contractors need a little extra cash flow. And so what they'll do is they'll sell it. Once they push it up, they will sell the topsoil to get some cash flow to build things, and then they put it back. But they simply order topsoil and they bring it back. And that topsoil may not be from the original site, more than likely is not. So even though there are 22 soil types, say in Wake County, if yours is pushed up to the side and your home is built, and then they try to push it, and then they bring new material back, that new material you could have a 1 in 22 chance of getting what you had before. So as a caveat to this, if you are in construction, I mean, if you're building something and you like the soil you have, you might want to tell them to keep that and not push it away, and then make sure they put it back. But more than likely, it won't be. More than likely, it won't be what you had before. And in many cases, some cases, it's really not really very good soil. So here's an example of what we're talking about. This is a soil profile here in Raleigh. And what that soil is, and you see here in the top, is called a sisal clay soil. And people think, well, clay soil is bad. Well, no, clay soils are really very good if it's a true soil. And that's what we have here. The top 8 to 9 inches is soil. But if you take that away, this is what most people have that they're trying to deal with. This is what you're working with to make, to grow your garden and things in. So, and this is basically, in this case, just clay. This is subsoil. This should not see the light of day for 10,000 years. And yet, many of us deal with this. Does this look familiar to anybody? I can't see your heads nodding, but a lot of people go, well, that's exactly what I have. This is what I've got to deal with. And the reason why you struggle with soil is it's not what you think. It is only maybe a little bit of soil, but it's mostly subsoil. Okay? And in fact, there's a term for this, and this term is called urban soils. And the urban soil that one deals with is a hodgepodge of any number of things. It could be construction debris. It could be just subsoil clay. It could be something foreign that has been dumped into the area to bring back into this material. It could be any number of things. And so trees, shrubs, and all of our gardening and plant materials are all subject to things that really they shouldn't be subjected to. And this is true more often than not. This is truly the way it is. And because of that, the characteristics of urban soil aren't what we would like. So urban soil characteristics are not anything that we would really like to have. For example, the first thing is it truly lacks any kind of soil structure. It doesn't have that. It's just clay. If it looks terrible, that's really because it is. It's not really designed to do that. So it lacks structure from the very beginning, doesn't have it. Most of the time it is more compacted than what we'd like to see, so it doesn't drain well at all. Right? Am I describing things that are going on in your garden right now? Yeah. And also there's pH issues. There's nutritional problems that come along with this. And so many times the things that we're stuck with are not true soils. It's called urban soil. It has its own classification. Okay? Now, like Mark had said, I've been in the horticultural soils business for a very long time. And as it turns out, we've got different groups of things that we work with. We do work with the native soils. And the native soils is exactly what everybody wants. Native soils are the things farmers deal with, right? Native soils are things that we grow our vegetables and fruit trees and ornamentals in the ground. It's wonderful things, and that's a whole world of that. But we also know that many of our ornamental crops and much of our crops today are moving into containers. And there's a huge container industry for horticulture. And growing in containers is a whole different thing, and the soils that we use there or substrates that we use there are very different. So there's some overlap, but there's a lot of it that's not. So it's kind of its own entity. But what we're dealing with in the garden is the urban soil system. And that system is different again. Some of it's native, it's a little bit like containers, but it's its own thing. And this whole area of urban soils is really problematic. It's really problematic. You think it's a problem for you in your garden, but there are cities that have major issues in drainage because of the urban soil system. For example, many cities, when it rains, it floods, and they can't get rid of their water as well. And part of the reason is the soils that they use, their urban soils, are very, very, very dense. And so A move that we've been seeing over the last 10 years is called the construction of sponge cities. All right. This is where they're trying to get the soils in the city proper areas themselves to drain better and to hold more water, like sponges. In fact, they've even SpongeBob has joined the fray as to help promote this type of thing. And this is not just in the U.S., but it's all over the world. In fact, we've worked with particularly the municipalities in Beijing and in Shanghai in the amelioration of their urban soils, because it's such a huge problem, and trying to fix these urban soils to make them to where they work. What we're really trying to do is just make them more like the native soils we all think we have. But then what it is we don't. So really, the problem is in the garden is we don't have what we think we have. We don't have soils. Now, you can, we have different options for this process. You can just replace the topsoil. You can literally buy topsoil and put it in your area. And there's two basic ways to do that. You can go to a topsoil company, okay, and they will have real topsoil. And it's a blend of that organic layer and that A horizon together, and you can buy this straight out. But generally, these are not, there's no testing that's done on them. They don't measure pH, or they don't measure EC perhaps, and they certainly don't classify them as a particular, like a Wagram soil or a clay loam or whatever. That's not done. So, and this is where a lot of the people in construction will buy the topsoil and bring it back. Okay. So you can get topsoil here, but you can't necessarily be specific to the soil itself. These are generally just available in bulk loads and will show up in large trucks and dumped on your property, and then you can spread it out and put it on. So that's one option for you. What most gardeners tend to do is to look for these things in retail, and you can find topsoil in the retail. And when we talk about retail, we're talking about gardening centers and big box stores like Lowe's, Home Depot, and Walmart. But these are all just organic matter. There's nothing but organic matter in them. In fact, there's no actual topsoil in them, none whatsoever. And you think, well, isn't that a bad thing? Well, not necessarily, as we'll talk about. But it's actually not topsoil. And how do you know? You can tell very easily whether or not you've got topsoil in a retail bag. And you know how you can tell? You pick it up. You just pick it up. If you can pick it up, it ain't topsoil. Let me show you. Retail topsoil, as general rule, is about 12 pounds a cubic foot. All right? So a 3-pound bag of retail topsoil will weigh what? 36, 40 pounds. All right? And you can find plenty of 40-pound topsoil. Okay? Actual native topsoil weighs 80 pounds a cubic foot. 80 pounds. All right? So a 3-pound bag of real topsoil is 240 pounds. So if you can pick that up, more power to you. But you're not loading many of those in the back of your station wagon or your SUV and taking it home. So we don't have true topsoil in these places, but it's organic matter instead. Now, you might think that this is problematic, and so, well, what are you supposed to do? Well, the good news is we can build good garden soil, and it's not particularly difficult to figure out what to do. You just have to be able to do it. So it's really not a major issue or a major problem, but we can build it. And that's the mindset that most people have to have when they're working on soils, is that whenever you're gardening, you all need to be also sort of constantly building your soils at the same time. Now, how do you figure out what to do? Well, a lot of people, like today, a lot of people are looking at this on YouTube, And so you go to YouTube for these things and you look to see what people do. It's really interesting because there's a lot of different ways to do things, and people, when they talk about gardening advice, at least the questions they ask me, they say, well, I saw one video and it says to do it like this, and someone else says, no, you need to do it like this, and I don't know which one to do. Well, what we're going to talk about today is, here are the basics, here's the facts of what's going on, and here are the options. And what I will tell you is there's just lots of options for you. Now, J.C. Raulston, again, had a great comment many years ago. He says, as far as gardeners are concerned, he said gardeners are more like chefs than scientists. All right? So what they do, and you see this, you've seen cooking shows, and you see a show about how a particular chef cooks chicken, all right? But we know for a fact that we watch this, and they're very specific, and it said it's got to be just like this, and you do it like this, and this is how it works. And we think in ourselves, well, that's an interesting way to cook chicken. But we all know that there's many ways to cook chicken and many ways to make meals. So we take these as maybe opportunities, and then we utilize this information. But we don't have to pick one way or the other. We just can utilize this information take it with a grain of salt. So what I'm going to do now is show you the things you need to do to build soils and what those options are. Okay, so if we're going to talk about building soil, what are we starting with? Well, here's that Cecil clay loam we talked about. Let's take the soil off, and here's what we have left. All right? If this is what we have to start with, the question is, what's in it? And the other part of that is what's actually missing. So what's missing in here that we had in the other? And there are two things that are missing. One is organic matter. Organic matter in soils is a small component, generally between 5 and 10% in a true mineral soil, but it's there. Here in subsoil, there's none, almost none. There's no organic matter in here. There's not supposed to be organic matter in here. It's not natural for organic matter to be in a subsoil with soil on top. It just isn't. But so organic matter is one big piece. The other piece are the microbes. Most of subsoils have almost no life in them at all. There's none, almost none. If you're digging in your soil, all right, and at the top you might find a few earthworms, for example. If you dig a foot or 2 feet down, do you find an earthworm 2 feet down? No. You don't find microbes in the subsoil, and there's a reason for that. So, okay, so we're missing these two things. So how do we rebuild it? How do we fix this? Well, basically we put back what we don't have. And it's really easy in one sense, because basically we add organic matter. The key to building soils is putting organic matter back into what we have. Okay? We add organic matter. Organic matter is a wonderful thing. Organic matter breaks down, and that's the nature of organic matter is it will break down. And as it breaks down, it releases humates. And those humates are just this little oozy liquid, and if you get enough of them, it's this little black liquid. But it literally oozes into the soil, and it coats the particles. It literally does. It separates those particles, and it aggregates them together, and it becomes a soil. And by making it into these aggregates, it allows for percolation of water, it allows for air to move in and oxygen to be exchanged, and it builds the soil. Okay, so the key of the construction is to put organic matter in here to do its work. And the other thing that organic matter does is that it's food. And it's food for the second part of things that are missing, the microbes. These microbes, there are billions and billions of these things in the soil. And there's all kinds of things. My my old soils prof at Texas A&M called them critters, okay? And if we look at the kinds of soil critters that we have in these things, There are many things. Lots of bacteria and fungi, particularly that break down the organic matter, okay? Algae, protozoa of all kinds, and even nematodes. And yes, there are nematodes that are actually beneficial in the soil, not just the ones that attack plants. The ones that we think of more often are bigger things like earthworms. Okay? Now, some of these you can't see, but they're there. And in fact, they're there in such high amounts, it's amazing. If we take 1 acre of soil and measure all of these kind of critters that are in there and weigh them, it's amazing how many there are. And why are they there? They're there because they feed on this organic matter. The organic matter that we've put in actually is the food that they eat. And as they multiply, they make tons of these things. In mineral soils, in good natural native soils, there's approximately 5 tons of these soil critters per acre. 5 tons of these materials per acre. Right? Earthworms are a good thing. We can see earthworms, right? And if you see a lot of earthworms, we know that our soil's doing pretty well. Earthworms, do you know how many earthworms there are in an acre of soil? Just a good native soil without doing anything extra? There's at least 1 million earthworms per acre. 1 million. It's a lot. It's a lot. So the life will come back if we add the organic matter. Okay, so if we build the garden soil, there's a mantra that we have to have in order to build it. And it was in the title of what we said before. And that was, if you build it, they will come. All right? If you build it, they will come. When I give a talk like this with a live audience, basically I just have to say, if you build it, and they all tell me, they will come. Where does this come from? Obviously, if you're over 40, you know, because it's from the Field of Dreams, a movie set in Iowa, and it's not actually about soils, but the mantra is still there. But it works very well in soils. If you build it, if you build your soil, you will get all the microbes that's going on. And so in essence, for us to build life into these soils, all we do is set the table. All we do is say, here, you put the table out, you put the big buffet out there, and lo and behold, they show up. And they show up. And you think, wow, that's easy. So we don't have to add special things that we think, well, if I get this little special juju juice that is, and I can put this on this will really help my soil. No. All you need to do is add organic matter to it. So it's kind of a simple process. The problem is, most of the time when we're doing this, we're not adding enough. And so the caveat to this is that this is, because you're building, this is actually going to take more than you might think it will take to do this. Let me show you. Okay, so we have, let's say you have a plot, and it's 5 feet wide and 20 feet long. And this is what you want to do, and you want to build the soil in here. So you got 100 square feet. Generally, if you're going to amend the soil down to a certain level, it's generally around 6 inches. Let's say 6, just for grins. The amount of material for any type of soil that you're going to build, you need to put 25 to 50% by volume of organic matter into that. Okay? So if you're going to go 6 inches down into the soil and amend it, you need to layer about 1.5 to 3 inches of organic matter on the top and then till it in to 6 inches. Okay? And you go, well, that's not that big a deal, right? That's not that big a deal. What that turns out to be, though, is 1/2 to 1 cubic yard of organic matter that you need to put in this area. All right? So, generally these come into, if you go to the big boxes or the garden centers and they sell you 2 cubic foot bags, you'll need 6 to 12 2 cubic foot bags to amend the soil. 6 to 12. All right, 25 to 50%. Did a recent check just 2 days ago, and the cost of these materials are about $4. That's the minimum per bag for a 2 cubic foot bag. All right, you can spend more than that, but the least expensive it is about $4 a cubic foot bag. So it's about $2 a cubic foot. That means that you will spend $25 to $50 to amend this bed. Okay? If you go to the retail store and do that, now if you got one bed, that may be actually the way to go, the simple way. But if you've got more area, or if you want to do bigger amounts, then you can see that that can begin to add up. Now, fortunately, the kind of organic matter you use is not as important. All right? So the question is, what kind of organic matter can we use? Well, you can find things that are listed, like topsoils, soil conditioners. Okay, they're all organic matter, so they're all very usable in this. You can find manures, particularly cow manure or poultry manure, and that works out pretty well too. Worm castings, wonderful things to add. Okay, but you don't want to add them as just organic matter. You want to add them more as a maybe perhaps more of a nutrient supplement. And you can get good quality compost from certified composters and put in there. Okay, so these would be options that are available to go pick up and purchase and to use. But you can also use any kind of plant residue that you have. So things like grass clippings, leaves from the fall, yard trimmings in your own yard. You can get a bulk load of bark, bark fines to put in there, or even wood chips. Any of these things will work, as well as any of those other products. Any of this will work, and any of this will build your soil. The difference in these is basically how quickly that it works. Most of these things, some of these things like grass clippings and leaves break down very quickly within just a few months. Yard trimmings, a little more, barks, wood chips, it takes longer. But it really, for my money, if you've got a lot to do, then what you want to do is to find maybe the cheapest material you can find in your area, or what's plentiful, or what's available. You can go to your local, like we have a place that does composting, okay? That you can take your clippings and you take it to the city or the county, and then they'll just take it for you. You can go there and buy some of that their compost or materials that they've put together. And generally that's not very expensive. Sometimes it's $10, $15, $20 a pickup truckload, things like that. So you can find cheaper sources of materials depending on how much you're going to use. But the key is to use organic matter. Now the good news is, as far as building the soil, it doesn't particularly matter. It does make a difference, but a little bit of time and it all breaks down. Okay, so we want to add organic matter, and we want that organic matter, but we can pick and choose what organic matter we use. Now the question is, what do you do? How do you build the soils? Well, for the most part, I think it's best if most homeowners or gardeners actually define the beds they want to use. Okay, you can amend your entire area, like your entire lawn and everything else. But if you do that, that's an awful lot of material, and in fact, you may have to roll the soil if you till it all up, simply because it would be too. It would have too much aeration, and you would need to level it. So I like to restrict my building process to define beds. So you can pick and choose where you're going to go. All right? And there are different ways to do this, of course. You can put it into a traditional garden plot, particularly if you're going to grow vegetables or things like this. Then it's always in it. This is sort of the traditional way. You define your area and you put it out. And what a lot of them are at least in the past, this is on the back side of this fellow's property. It's sort of where his garden is so he can grow his vegetables. But what we're seeing today is more of an explosion of people trying to make their bed areas even more ornamental, even if they're not putting ornamentals in them. Okay, so raised garden beds are really, really taking off. It's always been an option for people, and you can incorporate it directly into the ground. But we're seeing this where you define the bed. It's actually raised up some, and it's actually a wonderful way to garden. Raised beds can be ornamental, just in their construction, and yet you can grow vegetables and flowers or anything you want in these raised beds. So I want to make a little bit of a push for raised beds because I think they're easier to work with, and you can have more success with these things. One of the reasons is because raised beds are you can actually have more intense production out of a raised bed in that same square footage than you would in a large garden plot, because you can specialize that and you can add a little more to it. And you don't have to do all of them at one time. You can do them, space them out, do one or two this year and a couple more next year. You can sort of expand it as you want to. But one of the best things about this is you can literally be in the garden without compaction. One of the things about what raised beds does is allow you to walk in between the beds. And there is almost nothing more pleasurable to me than to walk in the garden. It's one thing to look at it from outside, but to be in it is great. But if you have a big garden plot and you're literally walking in it to harvest your materials or to see what's going on or to bring your children in and show them what's happening, then you're tramping all over the soil and you're compacting it in different ways. Whereas if you are in raised beds, you can view it, you can reach the materials, but you're not actually damaging the soils. You can also have very specialized beds. You can have one for roses. You can have one for tomatoes. You can have one for bulbs, crops, and things like this. So you can specialize these beds because they're all individualized. And then you can also rotate crops among these beds. My wife's father was a preacher, and he planted 4 tomato plants in his garden every year: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, 4 tomato plants, just 4. So in our house, we had 4 tomato plants. We had Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if I planted them in the same spot year after year after year, they're more susceptible to disease. And so rotating them through with other crops and moving them around is a good thing. So you can rotate among these beds pretty easily for the same thing. So the raised garden beds give you visually appealing areas and functionality all at the same time. You know, we not only have decks today, we have outdoor living areas, all right? So we're viewing the outside, and raised beds just fit right into that process. So, but you can incorporate it or put them in raised beds. Now, the other question is, how deep? How much do you need? How deep do you have to make these things? Well, that really depends on what you're planting. But one of the caveats about this is you got to be careful, because you can't look at the grass that's growing as a sign of good turf. Grass will fool you. And grass will fool you. And the reason it'll fool you is because you don't need any soil to grow grass. This is grass that's been on a parking lot for 3 weeks. All right. Now, it's not designed to be that way, but this is sod, okay, rolled up. So it's got a little layer of soil that comes with it. And here, the sod showed up when it was supposed to for this construction site, but the contractor was 3 weeks behind. Well, but they couldn't leave it all rolled up and on pallets this way, so they spread it out in the parking lot. And they watered it. This photo was taken 2.5 weeks after they put it out, and they are mowing the grass because the grass is growing. You don't need good soil or a lot of soil to grow grass. You just need irrigation. I'm being a little facetious there, but that's really the key. So seeing somebody's lawn and saying, boy, they've got a great lawn, they must have good soil, that didn't mean anything. It means it's only this deep. So, what are the depths that we need to have? Well, if you're talking turf, it's only about 2 to 3, 4 inches. But if you're talking annuals, maybe a little bit more. 3 to 5 inches Vegetables in itself, about the same. Maybe a little deeper, particularly if you're growing root vegetables at all. You need a place for them to develop. And so about 3 to 6 inches is for most of the annuals and vegetables that you have. If you're going shrubbery, the bigger the shrub, the little more you need. So you may be 6 to 8 inches here. And trees are a different story. Trees are different because they get bigger, they need anchorage. And so I said 12 to 18 inches, but you just don't till them that you've got tree pits and things like that. And that's a little bit more than what we want to talk about. So when you're doing trees, that's a different subject that we're not going to truly address all of that here. So anyway, but you see the depth you have or need. So back in this case where you've got foundation plantings and then you've got a few trees, then you need the turf. You need to have about 3 inches of soil. Shrubbery, you need about 6. And the trees themselves, you need more than a foot. Okay? All right. So now we're getting down to the last parts of this. What do? How do you add organic matter? And there's 2 basic ways to do that. Incorporation is the most traditional way to do it. This is how most people add organic matter to their soils. Okay? And you see this, and you can do it by hand, and you can do a great job by hand. Here you can see this lovely lady is amending her garden plot. It's a raised bed, obviously, but she is working it with a spade and incorporating her materials. And it'll do great. You don't need any special tools to do this. But you can use ways to do this. And if you're talking about gardens mostly, you're talking about tilling or incorporating it, and you can do that with machines. All right? You can either do it by hand or with tillers, but this is the second part. That's the caveat. One, it is you need a lot of organic matter, and the second thing is you need to put it in, and that takes patience, or it takes some extra strength and oomph to be able to do this. And believe me, whether you're doing it by hand or standing behind a tiller, it's going to take a little bit of effort to make that happen. Now, tillers, for me, this is the way that I would incorporate it in, because to me it does a great job. This is the kind of tiller that I have. It's a wonderful thing. In fact, it is the best tool that I own, and I'm a big tool guy. And this is my favorite thing. I use it twice a year. I only use it a couple of times, but it is the greatest thing to get behind that and incorporate materials and break up and use the soil. It's a wonderful thing to do. I also have a small tiller, a smaller one too. It doesn't get as deep as the other, but it's great to use around foundations, and it's great to use for weeding in between during the year. But regardless of what you're doing for tilling, basically, and if you're doing it by hand, you want to do the same thing. You want to break up the soil, so you want to run the tiller over the soil itself, down as deep as you can, and probably that's about 6-8 inches at the most. Then you do this to break up the soil. Then you put a layer of the organic matter on the top, however deep, about 1 to 3 inches, okay? And then you till it in, incorporate it. So you till it twice. You till once for the material, for the soil. 2, you layer it, and 3, you till it in. And that's a great way to do this. Okay? Now, again, 25 to 50% by volume. And so if you got 6 inches down, you want to put 1.5 inches to 3 inches on top and incorporate it in. And it does a wonderful job. Now, this used to be where I would stop years ago talking about this. But in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of work done on mulching. And what they found is that mulches too will break down, and they release humates into the soil as well. And these humates that they have will aggregate the soils. So in fact, you can take, and they've done this, where they take a bare ground with this undisturbed, and they simply put mulch on the top of it. And they put several inches of mulch on the top, and they leave it. And they leave it there for 3 years or 4 years. And what they find later when they move the mulch back is that they've actually created some soil underneath it. Underneath it. So we can use mulching as a way to help build the soils. We usually think about mulch as not that way, but as, regulating temperatures, reducing water loss, etc. But also mulch is part of the building process. So we can use that. Now, the key here is to use mulches that actually break down. Make sure you use materials that will break down, and that will help in the process. Now, there is another option based on that we're seeing, and it's all on YouTube and the like, and that is layering instead of incorporation. And here, you simply layer organic matter on top of the soil without working it in at all, and then you plant directly into the layers. And you say, well, that just can't work. Well, no, it works pretty well. It works pretty well. And it for many people, it means you don't have to actually till up the soil itself. It has different names. One's called lasagna gardening, okay, because you layer you have different layers when you build lasagna, right? That's the same thing. You have different layers. It's also called sheet mulching sometimes, where you put sheets of mulch out or a lot of mulch out at one time. And it's also, there's a whole group of wood chip videos where they say, I grow in wood chips and this is what I use all the time. Here, you see in this photo, this is layering as well, but they simply have sides on it. So you can layer on top of the garden without sides, or you can put sides on it and in both ways, you're making raised beds in the process. Now, there's lots of different things that are suggested, but here's what always works, and the others are variations on this. What I like to do in an area, if I'm just going to layer, is to put a little compost down first. I like to have a little connection between what I'm putting on top and the bottom eventually. And so I just put a little bit of compost, not much. Then you put a weed barrier down. Could be cardboard, it could be newspaper. It doesn't matter. And this keeps weeds from beginning to grow up through this process. Then you put down a compost of some kind, one that has a little more nitrogen in it, like grass clippings, leaf mold, and some other things. And you put that down, that organic layer down, and then you mulch it. And then the mulch could be wood chips, it could be bark fines, it doesn't really matter. You can put things on the top. Okay, you can, some of these places some of these things will tell you need to layer brown and then green and brown and green and brown and different. That's okay if you want to do that. But basically you need a weed barrier, some compost on top, and then some mulch on top of that. One of the most interesting ones, and one of the cheapest, is wood chips. Because wood chips you can get from your local arborist. Because when they do any kind of work like this, there's generally a truck that pulls the chipper behind them, and then they grind this stuff up and they go. Where they don't want to go is way back to some kind of landfill or landscape place where they dump it. They want to get rid of it and move on to their next site. They don't want to carry it around with them all day. So you can get wood chips for free. You can have wood chips delivered and dropped off where you want. Okay, you can but they even have apps. This is an app called Chip Drop, but there's plenty of them out there, and on your phone, and you can say when you want it, and you can designate where you want it. Kind of puts a little map and shows, and then next thing you know, it shows up. Now you can't say I want wood chips and I want them delivered by 10 a.m. Tomorrow. And you can't say that. You say I want wood chips, and then everyone knows who's looking for them, and so then they will just show up. Here it is, boom. But it's a way to get a lot of organic matter for free. Okay. The layering is a raised bed process. Here's without sides, okay, and here's with sides. And here you see the cardboard down, and then they're putting the organic matter on top of that. It's a simple process in that. And if you think, well, does that really work? Well, let me show you an extreme version of this. Horticulture, okay? Started in Germany a few years ago. And here, it's gardening in mounds. But you put your debris out without breaking it up, and then you cover it up. Kind of like this. And then you plant in the mounds, and you don't do anything, it all breaks down underneath there. You can do this in raised beds, and you see here, they've got logs and debris, and they just dump it in, and then they cover it up with some compost or some other organic materials, and then they grow in it. The reason I'm mentioning this is because don't be afraid about this is kind of magic formula. There's not. You can do this yourself. Okay, last thing. You can incorporate or you can layer. Incorporation is faster. You can do it right before you plant. So you can have your organic matter, you can incorporate it one day, and then you can even plant that day or plant it the next day. So on a weekend, you can do them both, and you're done. Then, of course, you mulch it. And you mulch it every year, and you keep adding to that, and it makes it work. Layering takes a little more time. Layering is no-till, and so you don't have to worry about the process of trying to break up the soil, but it takes longer. Here, you want to start in the fall or the winter, build your layers and let it sit, and then in the spring, you just move the mulch pack and you plant directly into the material, and you've already mulched. But again, you want to mulch them every year. Okay? So you've got two basic ways of doing this. I like to have the raised beds because it has better drainage just to begin with, but incorporation directly also works too. Either one of these work for anything that we want, layering or incorporation. The only thing is trees, and the only caveat is be careful if you're using trees because you need stable soil for the trees, particularly as they get bigger, and so it's usually better in the ground. But other than that, you've got different options. So remember that there are many ways to build a soil, but the key is knowing that you got to build it, and two, getting to the program. Organic matter and either incorporating or layering, you can pick and choose. And one is not necessarily better than the other. One's more traditional, but the other works too. So the way for gardening to be as great as it can be in the South or anywhere is to have good soil. And the whole process then is to create that soil, and then you can plant almost anything that'll survive in that hardiness zone is fair game. All right? Well, I appreciate your attention in this matter, and if there's questions either now or perhaps a little later, we can get to them. But thank you so much, and I'll be happy to chat with anybody that has any issues with them.
Bill, that was fantastic. We've got a lot of questions. We'll get most of those at the end. One that's come up a few times that maybe you can address right now. I think I know the answer, but I'd like to get one from the expert. You talked a lot about clay because that's what we have here in Wake County, but we've got folks joining us from, I don't know, about 10 or 12 different states, and a lot of them from the coast or southern Wake County even, where there's sometimes some really fine sandy soils. Mm-hmm. And this is the beauty about much of what you were talking about. Do you want to address what you might do different or the same with sandy soils as opposed to clay soils?
Okay, well, that's a very good point. In fact, we did some research on this in the past: clay soils versus sandy soils. And if you're amending a clay soil, you can do this incorporation, this breaking up, and basically the actual tilling or breaking up of the material is a big component of making it better in clay soils. And then the organic matter helps to hold water. In sandy soils, it already drains pretty well. And so you want to put the organic matter in to feed, but also what we found is that in sandy soils, it tends to go away more often, and it goes away faster. So in sandy soils, we see that incorporation needs to be, you don't need it for more drainage. So 25% organic matter into that soil generally works pretty well. The 50% works better in the clay. But you can add, so you can go with a little less in sandy soil, but you might want to have to put more in every few years. You don't make it once, because that eventually as it breaks down, it goes on past the soil level and you end up with it being problematic. So you want to add the organic matter to hold the water, whereas in clay, you're trying to break up the clay so that it will drain. So it's a little bit different. Mulching, though, works really well. One of the things I find, though, when you put mulch on, it is, because I grew up on the coast in Texas, is sometimes they will put rocks or pebbles as a mulch, and to me it's okay, but you're defeating the purpose of building. And so if you're in sandy soil, you want to have mulches that do break up, because you want that organic matter to go in every year as much as possible. So if you've got to basically remulch every year with new mulch and it goes away, you're actually doing a good job in building the soil.
Thank you. Now we're going to have a lot of questions at the end about mulching, and I think it's going to be great to save until the end, because you mentioned having an arborist drop chips for you, and I know I'm pretty certain that's a service that our next speaker offers as well, and I know he has some thoughts on mulching and things like that. So, and I'm sure Denisha probably does too. So we'll get to that at the end. We'll save the rest of the questions for the end. Those folks who've asked questions, we will get to them. If you don't feel like we're getting to it, you make sure you just ask it again when we get to the panel Q&A at the end. We're going to take 5 minutes. So just for everybody to take a break. Panelists are welcome to talk. You're welcome to do whatever. But we'll take about 5 minutes so that people can run and get some more coffee, run and get rid of some coffee, whatever they need to do. We want to let people do it. There you go. We do, while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and put this backdrop on again. That's got some things coming up and stuff for people to know while we're waiting. But I want to mention a couple of things. One, that this Gardening in the South symposium, this free symposium, is something that we do multiple times per year, different topics. Sometimes they repeat because it's always going to be important to know how to build soils. That's always the most important thing in gardening, is building those soils. But our last one, we had talks on pests and issues, things like that. So it changes. So we do want you to keep an eye on that. We also, in the chat, you'll see a link for the guest book that we have. We really, really like people to go there and let us know where you're from. Already, we've had people from, Hawaii, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa. Most people are from North Carolina, but we've really hit all over the country. Between this Zoom and YouTube Live, we're up to pretty close to 600 people, I think, right now. If you know somebody who might benefit from this, have them go ahead and join. We are also recording this, and we will share it with folks. And like I said, questions for our speakers, we'll get to those at the end, but we want to let everybody have a chance to run to the restroom. I know I was riveted. And Bill, we had somebody talking, asking about the hugelculture in the chat even before you mentioned it. And it's that key. If you know the science, you know that the soil is what you're growing plants in, is there to provide nutrients, water, airspace, and structure so the plants can hold themselves up. It's the same principle as hydroponics, that you can grow with no soil at all if you are holding the plants up, providing them structure and providing them the nutrients and providing them the water and providing enough air for them to dry. So, it's really all of these things with soil. As long as your soil isn't actively hurting your plants, you really can, that's the biggest key. You can make it better. But if you know kind of what you're shooting for. It's interesting. And I've got a big woodland area that I'm slowly working on, and that hugelkultur is interesting to me because I'm taking out a lot of small trees and things, and gonna have Basil be delivering some wood chips to me at some point. So I may just dragging those trees around is a real pain. I may just chop them up, leave them there, and cover them up. I'm intrigued by this hugelkultur. I'm going to have to dig in a little bit more on that.
Well, in fact, that is exactly the use for that is in woodland areas like that. You can get a device to chop everything up and then spread it out, or you just lay them down and then you sort of mound up around them, and then you plant in those mounds later on. It's amazing how well it works. And some of these mounds are 3 to 5 to 6 feet high. I mean, they're huge, but they don't have to be. You can make anyway. So there's plenty of opportunities to look and see what that is. But it's just plants are very, very amazing, and most of the time plants grow in spite of what we do instead of because of what we do. And so the point about all this is you can make almost any attempt at this, and it's going to probably be helpful and not hurt. You're not going to hurt him if you just try to make him better.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think that's been about 5 minutes. Time goes by fast when you have a lot of great information to share. Once again, I do want to encourage everybody to sign our guest book. You can find that in the chat. Again, for new folks, I'm sorry. For new folks who've joined us, if in the chat you put comments you have, if you want to comment on something the speaker says, whether you agree with what they're saying or you've had differences or whatever, but when you're just commenting, put it there. But if you have a question, please put it in the chat. It's easier for everybody to see. It's captured for all the guests a little bit better, because probably with this many people, we have other people who have those same questions, and we will answer those questions that are easy to answer, and we'll save those questions for the end for our panelists to answer that we can't. But please do that. Now, this Gardening in the South, we've been doing this for several years now, and it's really been incredibly successful. Like I said, almost 600 people today. The part of what makes this possible is the support of one of our sponsors, Leaf and Limb. Leaf and Limb is an arboriculture company here in Raleigh, who, unlike most tree care services, which exist mainly to cut trees down and do other things alongside cutting trees down, Leaf and Limb is dedicated to saving trees, making them healthier, doing more to keep our green spaces green. So they've been supporting this because it's not just about trees, it's about the whole ecosystem. And the better we all are as gardeners, the better the health of the trees that they're looking at, and the less they have to do. If we all had healthy trees, I think Leaf and Limb would love that, would love to put themselves out of business by having all the trees being as healthy as possible. And because of their really different approach to tree care, we've invited Basil Camus, who is the chief vision officer and wizard of all things at Leaf and Limb, to come talk about trees. And he's going to talk about some real specific things that you can do to have healthier trees, and a couple of things to avoid. He is an ISA board certified master arborist, which means nothing to a lot of people, but he is also the chief tree ecologist at Leaf and Limb, and I think we can all understand that. Basil came the traditional route into this by graduating magna cum laude from Duke with a double major in economics and history. He did actually put that degree to use as an economic analyst, but then switched careers to become an entrepreneur and really work at something he loves, which is saving the trees, the green spaces, the birds, the insects, the whole ecosystem that goes along with great ecosystems. So without further ado, let me introduce Basil Camus from Leaf and Limb to talk about how to make trees healthier.
Hello, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it, and I'm very excited to be here. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and yes, indeed, I do actually, it's true. If we're doing our job really well at Leaf and Limb, we will eventually put ourselves out of business, and that would be amazing because that means we have a healthy planet. That's what we're after here at Leaf and Limb. We care for trees because we love this planet, and that the trees we have are so important to that. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Bear with me 1 minute here. I've got a PowerPoint presentation today, and today I want to talk about 4 ways to make your trees happy and 2 critical errors to avoid. And just briefly, I want to just sort of start at the big picture. So at Leaf and Limb, we care for trees because we love the planet. We connect the tree with the health of the planet, and that means that we approach tree care in a certain kind of way. Soil is a very big part of that, which y'all have all heard about soil now. I'll actually talk a little bit about that today. There's a lot of things we do, but anything we do, we're asking ourselves one fundamental question. Is this service creating a net positive gain for the trees, for the ecosystem, for the planet? We want to create net positive effects. So we don't want to spray a pesticide that's going to cause collateral damage to other populations. It's one of the reasons that we actually don't use chemicals at all. And Mark sort of hinted at this, but we did start off as a traditional tree service. And 2 years ago, or a little less, we actually quit cutting down live trees. It was a major step backwards for a year or 2, but we've bounced back. All of our services now are purely care. That's pruning, that's soil, that's care, that's planting. So that's a little bit about Leaf and Limb. Today, I want to start off with just a big picture. Why do trees even matter? Before we get started with some of the tips and tricks, why do they even matter? Well, in a nutshell, there's a lot changing here on planet Earth. And we're seeing things like, we've lost 60% of all life species here on planet Earth in the last 40 years. Water is disappearing. Healthy topsoil is disappearing. There's a lot of things that are disappearing. And we know that trees can play a major role in helping fix many of those issues. For example, trees are one of the things that animals and birds and insects actually need to survive. So if we could bring back trees in greater number, we could help bring back species that are either endangered or under serious pressure right now. So that's a little bit of a big picture, why trees matter. And the tips I'm going to show you today, these are things that you can do that will not only help beautify your garden and make your property shine, but they're also going to do good for this planet, and they're going to do good for biodiversity and all these other things we've just talked about. So with that, 4 ways to make your trees happy. I want to start off with number 1. So when you're pruning, you should always have a goal. This is really important. And I would argue that structural pruning is the number 1 goal. And rather than me explain what that means to you, I'm going to pop over here and I want to show you a video that's all about structural pruning. Here in the forest, trees compete for sunlight. And this means they grow tall, strong, and straight. But if left on their own, like this elm tree here, they often overgrow and end up hurting themselves in the long run. The answer is structural pruning. Hi, I'm Basil, and today we're talking about why we prune. It's the competition here in this forest that forces these trees to grow straight and tall. You'll notice they all have this general structure. They have a central straight trunk and well-balanced branches. This is really important for a tree. It's this ideal structure that helps keep them healthy and prevent breaking. Structure is strength. If we take away the forest, then all of a sudden this lone tree has all of the sunlight it could possibly want. And that means it's going to grow every which way, and it loses that really important structure that we saw in the forest. So I'll show you a couple of examples here on this elm tree. First of all, you'll notice that it has two trunks. And between these two trunks, it has this seam. This is something that could very easily separate in a windstorm, especially as the tree gets older. And then if we look up in the canopy, we see all these large, overextended branches. It lacks the structure that we saw in the forest. And unfortunately for this tree, that means that it could split. If that happens, it could cause damage to property, it could hurt somebody, and it would almost certainly be the end of this tree's life. The solution is structural pruning, and ideally that begins with a young tree like this oak, but it's important for older trees as well. The idea is that we remove branches to create the structure we're looking for. The process takes many, many years because we can only remove so many branches at any given time. But when it's done, hopefully we've created a tree that looks much like the ones we saw in the forest. That means a straight central trunk and well-spaced branches. For us to live side by side with trees in our neighborhoods means that structural pruning is really important. It helps keep trees healthy, prevents them from breaking, and it keeps us safe. And with all the serious issues that are facing our planet today, we need as many healthy trees as we can get. Alrighty, so when you're getting your tree pruned, remember, structure is strength. That is the key. We need structural pruning. It can help increase your tree's lifespan by hundreds of years. Oak pruned properly in the urban environment might last 500 years or more. So it's very important to think about structure when you're pruning. Another thing I see with pruning is not making proper cuts. But it's really important that you cut. There's only one place you can cut a branch, and it's called the branch collar. And let me show you a diagram. This is from
Basil.
Yep.
Basil, we're frozen on your YouTube video. Can you maybe stop sharing and then share again so we can see your
Yep.
diagram?
Yep. Let's do that. Okay, stop share. And let's share again. Can you see the diagram now of this branch?
Give it just a second. Not yet. Says you've started screen sharing, but I'm not seeing anything yet.
Okay. All right, let's try this again then. All right, we'll share again. All right, tell me if you're seeing a diagram here.
We're not, just a blank screen.
Okay. All righty. Well, this could get challenging without screen share. Let me let's try this a different way. How about there?
You may have to reboot whatever you're using for the presentation itself. Maybe that program is frozen.
It's just a web browser.
Okay.
Okay, can you see my PowerPoint? Or no, I can't see anything except my face now, can you? Okay. Okay, well, I will say this, there's always technical difficulties, so this is normal.
Yeah.
Can you see anything now or still no?
Still no.
Okay, tell you what, hang tight. Let's try something different here.
Oh, we saw something for a second there. Hey, Chris. Sorry, all. This is all part of the new world that we're learning to deal with.
All righty.
Basil back.
I'm back. All right, let's see here. Chris, if you want to give me host responsibilities again, we'll see if we can get this working again. If not, I'm gonna ad lib just me and the screen.
There you go. You can use your arm. We'll cut here. And you can,
Exactly. I'm gonna start drawing on the wall behind me. Well,
there you go. It's a nice white wall.
Co-host now, Basil.
all right, excellent. Can you see my screen?
You can.
Okay. Are you seeing my number 2 on my slide deck?
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. All right. So let's try this again. So now you should see a diagram. Are you seeing that?
Yep. We're good.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay. Cool. All righty. Well, this is a diagram of how to make a proper pruning cut. And A is your first cut, B is your second cut, and C is your third cut. Really important to do this on all your pruning cuts. Trees will otherwise begin to hollow out, and you don't want a tree with a hollow. If you do a bad pruning cut, you might actually create a hollow point, and 10 or 20 years later, that could be a real problem. Maybe there's a hurricane or a thunderstorm and that tree breaks. So it's very important to make the proper cut so that the tree can heal properly. Number 3, and this is my only other video in the lineup. I'm going to try the video again. Hopefully this works and does not freeze my screen, but we shall find out. Here in the forest, the soil has everything it needs. And because of that, it can take care of the trees. It feeds this oak here, and this thing is super happy. Here's the kicker. Each year, this oak drops these leaves. This rotting stuff, this is soil food. And if we have this, we also have air and we have water. This is what keeps soil alive. I'm Basil, and today I'm here to talk about soil. It is alive, and I mean, it's like really alive. It's like you and me. It needs oxygen, it needs water, it needs food. If it has these things, it's gonna feed your trees, it's gonna take care of your trees, they're gonna be healthy, they're gonna be happy. If it doesn't have these things, then you get this. This is what used to be a really beautiful old oak tree, and it is suffering right now. It's a sick tree, and let me show you why. Check this out. So I'm gonna use this screwdriver and I'm gonna try to push it into the ground. I want you to see how much I struggled to get this thing in. We're talking, oh my goodness, maybe 2 inches, if I'm lucky. That's definitely not full of air. You can just see this stuff. There's no water. And let me see if there's anything in here that looks like rotting food for soil. No.
Basil, I'm sorry, but the videos just are freezing up for all of us. So it might be just as easy for you to let us know what you're saying, or we could just listen to what you're saying, but we can't see anything. We're hearing the audio, but no videos. Okay. Yep, sounds good. Let's just pop back over to my slide. I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. Can you see my slide? Or have I lost it all?
Same problem as before. You're still stuck on that, Basil. So whatever you did to fix it will be good.
Okay. All right. Let me do that.
And we see it now. Yeah, there you go. Sorry, everybody. This is what happens when you have innovative people on. They want to use innovative ideas, and sometimes that takes a little bit to get figured out. All right, Basil.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on today, but that's fine. It is what it is, y'all. This is just how it goes in 2020 and 2021. I've done this presentation probably 100 times in the last year, and there's always something that goes awry. So it's all good. We're going to still have fun, and we can still talk about great, important stuff. I'm going to share my screen this time, and we're just going to stick to slideshow and photos. Chris, will you give me hosting privileges again?
This is why Basil's the wizard of all things at Leaf Limb. He can fix anything.
And I'm just roll with the punches, if you will. All right, Chris, as soon as I get host back, I will share my screen.
There you go.
Excellent. All right, y'all, let's just instead look at my slide. Can you see here, it says number 3, focus on soil health.
Looks great.
All right, so in a nutshell, the way that things happen in the world is that trees drop their leaves. And the reason they drop their leaves is that they want to feed all of the life that lives in the soil. And when they feed that life, then the life returns the favor and feeds the tree. So what we really want to focus on is feeding our soil. Like, think about having a dog or a child. You have to feed it, or them, or whatever that might be in your case, because that's one of the things that most of life on Earth needs. Water's another thing. Well, we get that through rainfall, luckily. So feed your soil, and let me show you some ways you can feed your soil. You can put down wood chips. So I've got on my screen here a big pile of nice free arborist wood chips. You can call any tree service and they will give these to you for free. If they tell you they're going to charge, tell them they're going to have to pay to dump them anyway, so they might as well give them to you for free. We also now here in North Carolina have this new website called chipdrop.com. You can go there and sign up, get free wood chips. This is a really fantastic way to feed your soil, but it's not the only way to feed your soil. I'd also recommend that you leave the leaves. So when those leaves fall every year, that's free carbon. Leave it there, let it rot in your soil and feed your soil. If you don't like how it looks, you can top dress it. You can sprinkle a little pine straw on top, or put your favorite mulch on top. So you get business on the bottom, party on the top. Everybody's winning. And then also don't forget compost. Rather than putting your green waste in by the street side, go get some free pallets from a nearby furniture store. You can make a little square by putting them upright, 4 angle irons. Now you've got a compost bin. Put all your food scraps, all your yard scraps, anything green coming out of your house or your yard goes in there. And now you're just making compost that you can put back in the soil. If we can get healthy soils, we have healthy trees. It's really important. All right, my 4th tip on how to make your trees happy and how to help create happy ecosystems here in North Carolina and beyond: plant native trees. I know you've probably heard this before. Probably most everybody here has read Doug Tallamy's books. I definitely recommend them. His latest one is Nature's Last Hope, which is really fantastic. It's all about native species. But in a nutshell, native trees and native shrubs and flowers support 35 times more life than a cultivar from Asia might support. So, you know, we think about beauty and we think about sun requirements and we think about water requirements, and these things are all really important. But I'd also encourage you to think about ecological support. What are your plants doing to actually help the local ecosystem? There are many, many butterflies that rely on these native flowers and trees, many insects, caterpillars. We have over 100 native bees here in North Carolina. Really cool bees out there besides just your average honeybee. So all of these creatures need our native plants. I would encourage you, select native. Right here, I've got a page on our site. We've got some guides on native plants, lots of articles. And then one of my favorite tools for this, if you can see my screen, this is the Native Plant Finder. It was a collaboration between Doug Tallamy and the Forest Service, and you can just pick a zip code. I'm going to enter in the zip code here, and then you get all kinds of suggestions for flowers and grasses, trees and shrubs. And don't forget, NC State also has an amazing plant finder. So lots of tools out there on finding native plants. All right, now we're going to transition 2 critical errors to avoid. So number 1, if you've seen this, we call it a mulch volcano. And because y'all are all on the call, you probably already know what this is, but it's basically the idea of piling up mulch on the base of a tree. We really don't want to do this. This mulch will actually rot out the tree, cause all kinds of problems long-term. So you don't want to pile that mulch on the tree trunk. Mulch is very good. Like I said earlier, wood chips, leaves, all these things acting as mulch. Put them around your tree, just don't pile them up around your trunk. And then number 2, no fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. In short, just stay away from all the sides. These are all short-term gain for long-term pain. I want to just walk you through a few things that might happen with these. So for example, most any fertilizer that you buy from Lowe's or your garden store is going to handicap your tree's root system, because it's basically, you know, one of the tree's roots' primary function is to go find nitrogen. Well, when you pump nitrogen in the soil, it makes for a lazy root system. You may actually get an underdeveloped root system. Not to mention, it bypasses all that life in the soil that we were talking about, and we need that life. That's what makes for a really healthy plant. Some fertilizers even kill fungi under the soil. I don't want to get into too much detail here, but there's a special kind of soil underneath the ground, a special kind of fungi underneath the ground called mycorrhizal fungi. And it partners with your tree's root system, and it helps the roots find water during drought and find nutrients. And if we put pesticides in the ground, we can actually kill that off. So lots of reasons not to do it. But here's one of my favorite. This is an article from New York Times. I would recommend you check it out if you have time. It's called "The Insect Apocalypse is Here." And it's a look at how so many of the chemicals we use, herbicides and pesticides, are killing off insects to the point where scientists estimate we've lost about 60% of all insects on the planet. That's pretty serious. Insects are a foundational part of all of our ecosystems. They're a foundational part for our food chains, not just for humans, for all animals. So we really do need insects. And the cool thing, y'all, there's always great alternatives to all of this. If you're feeding your soil with leaves and compost and wood chips, you don't need fertilizers. And you probably don't need any pesticides because your trees are healthy and they're able to defend themselves against any major attack. All right, and we're going to transition to this final slide here. There's so much more to talk about. I wanted to keep this short and sweet. Let me just show you a couple of resources real quick. Our website, we have tons of fun articles about all the stuff we've talked about and more. One of my favorite is this article, How Trees Can Save Earth and What We Can Do to Help. This is a really cool piece. You can also join our newsletter here. You can become a treecologist, where we have a free online course if you're interested. And then here's my email if you'd like to email me. If you do Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, here are all the various handles. We'd love to have you along, and I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is really fantastic. What you talked about, it just took off exactly so much from where Bill was and leads so well into what Denisha is going to do. We're gonna take another 5-minute break. Again, you can hop up if you need to for a 5-minute break before we get back with our next speaker. I do encourage folks to go to the Leaf and Limb website. Those videos I've seen them all. I've watched them. They are great. So go to the website. You can watch those videos. You can read the articles. The newsletter from Leaf and Limb is a fantastic resource. It is not a something to try and sell you on services. It really is interesting articles and information that I think anybody who's joining this call will find fascinating. I really do. Can't recommend it enough. And Leaf and Limb is a company that's really putting their money where their mouth is, quite literally, both by sponsoring this program for us, but also by acting out the way they think what's best for the world, which is rare. There are a lot of folks who talk a good game, but then they don't walk the walk like they talk the talk. And Basil's crew really does, and you see that with their folks. They've Leaf and Limb has done quite a bit of work out here with us to help us to go forward. And one of our big issues has always been not enough time and staff to really to necessarily prune and trade trees as they're young. So that corrective pruning is something we often need out here to really get the trees as healthy as they can be. And when his crew comes out, and it's everybody from their arborists to the office workers sometime who come out to do group projects, you can just tell they have pride in working for a company that really believes in making the world a better place. It's nice to see folks like that. We see it a lot on our nonprofit side at arboretums and public gardens, but it's a good thing it's a wonderful thing to see in a for-profit company, and we need to see more of that as all over the place. So give everybody a few more minutes. Again, we're gonna have a lot of questions at the end that will tie in for all of y'all. I think this is wonderful. A lot of questions about mulch and what to do under trees, and we've got the perfect balance. We've got the researcher who can tell you in detail all the science, and then we've got the person who's putting that science into practice on a daily basis and can really sometimes the best thing to do based on science is not a realistic thing to do based on reality, and it's you walk that line of the best you can do under certain circumstances, and that's the key is being able to walk that line. There have been a lot of comments. I will mention this about where to get good mulch, where to get things that are bagged if they have chemicals or heavy metals or things like that. If you are getting any type of soil amendment or mulch, not the freshly ground up trees like we talked about with chip drop, but if you're getting something that's been manipulated, let's say in some way, look for that seal from the Soil and Mulch Council. Bill has a substrate testing facility. They test samples from these companies all over. If it's got the seal of approval from the Soil and Mulch Council, then you're not going to have to worry about it having heavy metals or things that will damage your plants in there. So we can have Bill speak a little bit more on that at the end as well. Okay, we are going to get back to it. This has been fantastic, and I'm so excited about our next speaker. Denisha Seth Carley. Dr. Carley is another one of our phenomenal faculty members here at NC State University. She's a colleague of Bill and I in the Department of Horticultural Science, and she is the director of the Center for Integrated Pest Management here. Her research and outreach programs for sustainable managed landscapes focus on pollinator protection and habitat conservation, just like what Basil was talking about. She's worked on the restoration of historic Pinehurst No. 2 and Pinehurst No. 4 golf courses. And she just recently completed a book called Pollinator Gardening for the South, Creating Sustainable Habitats. It will be out and available in March, but it is available for pre-order now through the University of North Carolina Press. And we are going to have Denisha and her co-author, Ann Spafford, back out here again, hopefully in person, to talk about that book. But right now, I want to turn it over to Dr. Seth Carley to talk about pollinator gardening, how to plan, plant, and maintain successful and beautiful pollinator gardens.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark, for that really warm introduction, and good morning to everyone. I am so pleased to have the time to talk with you today about one of my very, very favorite things in the world, and that's gardening and pollinators. And I can't think of a better thing to do on a beautiful day in February, other than maybe stay home with a cup of tea and browse through my gardening books. But hopefully we'll inspire you to do that after you guys get off of our meeting today. So thank you for having me. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump right in. My talk is about pollinator gardening, and I'm going to talk a lot about planting and planting. I don't think I'm going to have time to get to the maintaining part, but we can certainly answer some of your maintenance questions at the end. And without further ado, I'll jump right on in. So if we were in person, I would ask for a show of hands. How many of you can tell me how many of the pictures that I have here on this screen are in fact pollinators. Fantastic. People are raising their hands. So if you raised your hand, would you say that all of them are in fact pollinators? All right. If you did, then you would be right. We often talk about bees when we talk about pollinators. And in fact, I would say the most common bee people would think of would be the honeybee, which you can see in the top left corner of my slide. A lot of people might mention butterflies. And while they are pollinators, technically, they don't make terribly efficient pollinators. But the second most efficient group of insects that are pollinators are actually flies. And I'm not going to talk much about flies and not really much about butterflies because bees are sort of in my wheelhouse. And so I tend to lean into the bee pollinator habitat. But I will tell you that anything you see here on this slide is actually a pollinator. We know very little actually about beetles and how they pollinate, but technically my dog walking through my garden could be called a pollinator. Anything that moves pollen from one thing to another is a pollinator. Again, today, we're mostly going to be talking about bees, a little bit about butterflies, and maybe birds. But if you have questions later about specific bees or birds or even lizards, feel free to drop them in the chat. So most people understand that bees are terribly important for not only agriculture, but also the beauty of our landscapes around us. And the most important pollinator, especially in terms of agriculture, is the Western honeybee. The honeybees actually benefit our agricultural system. Some people say they would contribute 1 out of every 3 bites of food to the honeybee. But native bees, which are also important and actually help a lot of agricultural crops that we don't think about, that honeybees cannot pollinate, are also terribly important. And in fact, when native pollinators are not available in the ecosystem or in the environment to service crops, honeybees actually contribute $8.3 billion to our economy. And oftentimes we think of honeybees in hives in someone's backyard or perhaps their side yard, but there is actually a very large industry that put honeybee hives on tractor trailers and go all the way from Florida in the early spring, all the way up the coast through the Carolinas, up to Maine, and then across our great nation, all the way to California, so that those bees can sit in different agricultural crops in the fields and pollinate those fields. So you can imagine in the South, we have cucurbits that need to be pollinated, and sometimes we have solanaceous crops. And then as you move up the coast, blueberries and cranberries, across the Midwest, all the way out to California for those almond fields. And so honeybees are indeed agriculturally perhaps the most important pollinator, but I want to stress that native bees are of equal value, if not more, in our home landscapes. So this is a picture, you may have seen some iteration of this slide at other times. As a quilter, I really love this slide. I did not take these photographs, I borrowed them from the internet, but you can see on the left-hand side, we have a beautifully balanced breakfast. And this is what bees help to contribute to our food system. We need them for apples, for berries, for the nuts in our granola, for the oranges that make our orange juice. Sadly, without bees, our breakfast would be quite dull, and we would have none of those really healthy fruits and vegetables to contribute to our breakfast and our nutrition. So again, bees, very important, especially if you like to eat. You've also probably heard, if you read the news or listen to the radio, that there are populations in decline. Mostly, again, we're talking about honeybees because they're managed, and we can actually count the number of bees in our hives and estimate how many are alive and how many are dead. And those numbers can sound quite staggering and can be quite alarming. But our native bees, again, less well studied, but equally important, if not more so in certain systems, are also in decline. What's causing that decline, you might ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. You can see from my little pie chart here And this is not representative of the percentage of each of these different challenges for the bees. It's just simply to demonstrate that the entire bee populations, whether they're native or managed bees, are in decline for a number of factors, including diseases and pests that you may have heard of. Climate change definitely impacts bees and bee populations. And of course, as Basil and I believe Bill both mentioned, the misuse or use of chemicals that directly impact or indirectly impact bee populations as well. Now, I skipped the first bullet point in my talk just a second ago, but I'm going to come back to that one now. Another factor that contributes to the loss of pollinators is actually a loss of their feeding and nesting sites. The nice thing about that, and that's why I have it here highlighted, is that that is something that we as individuals can make a very big impact on for our bees, our butterflies, our birds, and our other wildlife. So that's what we're mostly going to talk about today. So the really nice thing is that if you live in a city, you might think that your pollinator habitat doesn't have an influence or an impact on pollinator populations, but in fact, it really does. There's been some really wonderful research, some of which has come out of NC State even, that demonstrates very clearly that bees do very, very well in suburbs and cities. And if you think about that, it might actually make sense. Think about what you plant in your yard, or as you drive around, think about the diversity of plants that we have. Because we're humans, we by nature like diversity. Think about the Raulston Arboretum and the incredible biodiversity we have just in that area, right here in the heart of Raleigh. Because we like to plant a diversity of plants in our yards, we are also bringing a diversity of pollinators and wildlife, insects primarily, but also birds, to our communities. So those are really important habitats for our pollinators that we would like to protect. For the most part, pollinators do quite well in cities, especially if many people are planting areas where they can fly around and find forage and survive. I have a little star here. Pollinators do fine in the city. The only caveat to that is, of course, there can be heat island effects. The more pavement or asphalt you have in an area, the higher the temperature, and that can contribute as well to pollinator decline. But those are also areas that don't grow plants particularly well. So consider that as you're working in your yard. You want to think about that heat island effect and maybe plant away from your large cement areas. Bees also help feed people, so make room for flowers. Whether you have an urban garden, a community garden, or just a small garden in your front or backyard, those gardens can help contribute to increasing pollinator populations, which also help to increase the bountiful yields for our growing community and urban gardens. And Bill said it earlier, if you build it, they will come. If you add pollinator habitat to anywhere that is appropriate for those bees and those plants, then your bees will be happier and healthier and your plants will be more productive. So now we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty about how to design and plan your pollinator garden. Some of these tips are appropriate if you are just new to gardening and are just starting to think about how you would like to build your garden or design a new garden. And many of these tips can also be attributed to gardens that are already established and you'd like to renovate or add to. So the first thing you want to think about is, how would you plan a healthy meal for your family? You do the same thing for pollinators when you're planning pollinator habitat. You want variety, meaning you don't want to have the same plant in huge swaths of area. You want to plant a biodiverse garden. You want multiple layers or texture in your garden, just like you would have in a healthy meal. Now, we often think about seasonality in our gardens, but we also think about it when we're eating. What's seasonal now? Making sure that when you're picking plants for your garden, you're having plants that bloom as much as possible, as long as possible, both in the beginning of the spring, all the way through the summer, and into the late fall, because bees are going to need habitat and forage during the spring when they're coming out, through the summer, and through the fall. A lot like how I plan my meals at home. I go to the farmer's market, I see what's available and seasonal, I go home and I plan a meal. Now this last one doesn't quite fit with the meal plan, but think about groupings. When you're planting your garden, you want to think about multiple plants in one area so that you have clumps of plants, which not only look prettier from a design standpoint, but also help bees. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. So you see here in this picture, I've demonstrated the clumping of plants or grouping. In the scientific community, we just call this floral constancy. And all that means is that you see here the blanket flower or gaillardia in the foreground, that bright orange with just a tinge of yellow. That is actually 5 different gaillardia plants that have all been grouped together. That actually helps bees, some kinds of bees, not all are the same. But in the case of honeybees, for example, they prefer what's called floral constancy. That means that when they go out on foraging trips, they prefer to forage on a single flower type when they are collecting their pollen or nectar, depending on what they're out for that day. There are other bees that are generalists. Bumblebees are a great example. They don't care what they're landing on or where it is. They'll just flip from plant to plant to plant gathering pollen. But honeybees prefer floral constancy. So that's why when you see honey in the grocery store that says sourwood honey, that means that those bees that day went out and only collected pollen or nectar from sourwood trees. And we know that they've done that because they prefer to forage off of those same plants. Again, there are plenty of bees that don't do that. So just have as much variety as you can for your bees. Something else we like to recommend is, especially if you're a new gardener, carry a journal. I have mine with me. I was just looking for it. I carry a journal with me so that I can keep records of the dates that I'm noticing things blooming, especially at this time of year. I love to write down what's the first thing I've seen in my neighborhood that's blooming and the first bees or butterflies I see in the environment. That can help you when you're thinking about adding to your garden or even starting fresh. That gives you that seasonality. It helps you plant plants that are going to bring the bees earlier and earlier. And that helps, again, the bees' long-term population health. And no matter what your neighbors are planting or what the garden club says is the hot new flower of the year, don't be afraid to try new plants. Go ahead and be different. The bees are going to love you for it. One caveat again to that is just making sure if you're going to kind of break out of the mold and go off on your own on choosing plants, just make sure that the plants that you're choosing are not considered invasive in your area, because we would never want to encourage you to plant invasive plants because that's not good for you, for your gardens, and ultimately not good for your bees. So something else that bees need is a home, just like we do. We don't think about that a lot unless you think about honeybees. We all know honeybees live in hives. But what about all those other bees? Basil mentioned there are actually over 500 native bees just in North Carolina alone. And in fact, North Carolina is unique to the South in that we have one of the most diverse populations of native bees in the entire nation. So we need to make sure that we're having places that those bees can live and live comfortably. One of my favorite projects to do with kids or with scouting groups is to build our very own insect hotel. It's very, very easy. There are some wonderful plans online. Essentially, you can just go into your environment and forage for some logs and some bricks and some twigs and some sticks and hollowed grasses, and you just bundle them all together. There's no right or wrong way to do it. However, and I know we were talking a lot about mulch earlier, something to really consider if you're leaning into this pollinator gardening is that pollinators cannot live in heavy mulch. So I'm going to take a step back and mention something that I forgot to mention earlier, and that is when we think about bees, we think about honeybee hives, and that's fine for honeybees, but all the other bees don't live in hives. For the most part, and you can see it demonstrated here in my slide, they either live in hollowed out twigs or stems of grasses, such as switchgrass that are still in your yard. They, in some cases, even dig holes in your yard. They're not actually destroying the grass, although it really does feel like they are. They like those warm, sunny patches that are already fairly bare, and they burrow into the ground. So a lot of our native bees are using the environment in your garden and around your garden to build their homes, to plant their nests, so to speak. And so if you're heavily mulching your large areas, then those bees can't get through the mulch to build their homes. And we would never recommend using plastic in your landscape. Not only is it environmentally not friendly, but it also will smother the bees that are already there, but also won't allow your bees to nest in your ground. Don't forget the grasses and stems in your garden hotel, your bee hotel. As I mentioned, you want those hollow twigs. Bamboo works very nicely. And then again, hollow grass stems from warm season grasses work really well in these insect hotels. So this is something I talk a lot about, and I'm going to start with this. I cut my teeth in turf grass, and that's how I actually got into pollinator habitat, was because so many golf courses that I worked with were very, very good at growing grass, but they really wanted to spend more of their area protecting wildlife and bees. And so someone needed to become an expert on those, what we call out of play areas on turf areas or on golf courses. So think about those areas outside of golf courses that you see that may look messy or weedy. Those are actually really wonderful areas for pollinators and other wildlife. The same can be said of your yard. This is something that some people really appreciate me saying. Maybe if you don't like mowing your yard, you should just let the weeds take over. And then you can just tell your neighbor or whomever asks why you've stopped mowing your yard. You can just say, well, I'm protecting bees. And let me give you a few things that you can mention. First of all, this is a picture, this is a close-up of my yard. We don't do a lot of mowing in my yard either. And so some of the most important pollinator forage early on in the year are indeed found right here in my weedy lawn. Dandelions are extremely important, especially early in the spring. You often see them. In fact, just yesterday I was walking the dogs in my neighborhood and I started to see dandelions blooming. Stop thinking of them as weeds. Start thinking of them as baby bee food. Mother bees, which are all the bees that you see, are all female. They're all the workers. They go out and they're collecting. In this case, they're collecting dandelion pollen in the spring. They bring it back to feed their baby bees. So again, dandelions aren't weeds, they're baby bee food. And right now I'm going to tell you the secret of the very best bee food that you can have in your whole yard. And that is in fact white clover. Bees get a tremendous amount of nectar that they need for energy, and they get it from these white clover. The other nice thing about white clover, if you've ever seen it, you've noticed it doesn't grow terribly high. So I would never recommend that people let their lawns grow out of control. You might get in trouble with your homeowners association, but if you are letting some areas grow a little bit wild and go native, white clover is actually a really nice plant to have. There are also nitrogen fixtures, which I know that Bill would be approving of because they add nitrogen into your soil, so they increase soil health as well. One thing to remember about white clover, though, is it doesn't like high traffic and it doesn't do terribly well in droughty periods. So what I recommend for folks who aren't 100% ready to let their whole lawn go to clover and dandelions is just maybe set aside a little sunny area that you stop mowing and just see what comes up. And then again, when you see dandelions and clover, remember they're not weeds, they're bee food. Seasonality, I mentioned this earlier, is also very, very important. I'm not going to spend too much time on it on this slide because in a moment I'm going to show you about 7 slides. So you're going to want to get your garden notebook out. I'm going to show you 7 slides with my favorite and the best pollinator plants that we can have in our landscape here in North Carolina. And actually most of these plants are also very appropriate for the Atlantic area and the Midwest and even all the way as far as California, because I know we have folks on here from all over the US. So when we're thinking about seasonality, as a designer, my partner Ann Spafford would say, you want to think about seasonality because you want your garden to be beautiful at all times of the year. And of course that's true, but Ann's a landscape designer, so she's coming at it from sort of that artistic standpoint. In terms of bee habitat, I want to make sure that I'm encouraging people to plant plants that are blooming and providing not just nectar for energy for bees, carbohydrates, right? Just like with humans, we need that energy, those carbs to get us going. But bees also need pollen, which they feed their young, and that's the protein. So I always like to say that, you know, bees can't get enough carbohydrates. They've never been on the South Beach diet. Honeybees and some native bees will actually collect nectar and pollen and combine it together to form what's called a bee loaf. And again, they're feeding their baby bees with that. You want to choose plants when you're selecting them for your bee landscape that provide both pollen and nectar. And believe it or not, some plants provide some pollen, but not nectar, and some plants do a better job providing nectar and very little pollen. Now we're going to talk a little bit about design. So I'm sort of out of my comfort zone here a little bit, but what I will tell you is that if you're new to gardening or you have a new area in your yard that you'd like to convert to maybe away from lawn, or you have an old garden you'd like to renovate and turn into a new pollinator garden, you can go online and just type in garden design. And you're going to find that there are hundreds of ideas about garden design that you can find on the internet. There is no right or wrong way to design a pollinator garden. So find one that speaks to you and that you really appreciate and enjoy and feel like you can tackle, and just go with that. If you aren't inclined to go online and get overwhelmed by the thousands of beautiful design gardens that might be out there, some things to think about that you might not have considered before are these. That is, that instead of going to a big box store or to your favorite native plant nursery or even to your gardening handbooks or guides to buy your plants, before you select your plants when you're designing a garden, the best thing to do first is to think about how much light your site has, because the amount of sunlight, of course, is very, very important. And almost all the plants I'm going to talk about in just a moment are full sun or high sun area plants. The other thing you want to think about is form. Do you want big trees? Do you want shrubs? Do you want everything to be low growing? And again, a designer would recommend that you have all those different layers so that you have a more beautiful design, more pleasing to the eye. And you want to think about the colors you might want in your garden. And only after you have thought about all those things do you go and pick your plants. Now, I've told you the right way to do it, and now I'm going to tell you the way I do it. In the spring, I get so fed up with the cold and the rain and the snow that the first sign of spring, I run out to my favorite nursery and I buy all the plants that I want, and then I bring them home, and then I plant them in my yard. I call that the yes, please form of gardening. Again, my co-author, Ann Spafford, usually just shakes her head when I tell her about my style. But I'm telling you that because I just want you to know that there's no right or wrong way to design your garden if you have the right elements in it. Just a few other things to consider, and you can get a little artsy with this if you want. Pollinators, like people, have three basic needs. They need space, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, right? Go light on the mulch if you need mulched areas, and no plastic in your landscape. They need food, and we've talked about that, and we're going to talk about more about that in a moment. But also, just checking my time. Also, it can be nice to add a water element to your yard, and especially if you are a honeybee hive owner or have a lot of bees in your landscape. Something the bees especially appreciate is a little place to dip their toes in and to drink some water. Now, I know in the South and part of the Southwest and probably even up north, the first thing that you're going to think of is, well, I don't want standing water in my yard, because what do you get? Mosquitoes. Nobody wants mosquitoes. And I'm a big fan of creatures great and small, and even I don't care for mosquitoes. So what I can tell you is that we've thought of a few strategies that are demonstrated on the slide here to allow you to add a gentle water element to your yard, but will also discourage mosquitoes. I'm not going to spend too much time on these because I don't have a lot of time left and I have so much more I want to tell you. But something I like to do with my old wine bottles, flip them upside down, stick them in my garden. Not only are they pretty and it's recycling, but you can see that little divot because I buy cheap wine. I don't buy the high-end stuff. You can see the little divot here in the wine bottle that will collect ever so small amounts of water, but not enough to encourage mosquitoes. Just enough for the bees, in fact. You can use plants with big leaves like this one here in the lower right corner that actually will collect water. And not only is that really beautiful and attractive, but again, doesn't encourage mosquitoes, but will still allow that water element in your garden. And of course, the nice good old-fashioned plant bottom that you can get at any big box store, or you might even have in your backyard or gardening shed. Put some stones in it, add some water, instant water element.
Hey, Denisha?
Yes,
Denisha?
sir.
I just wanted to come in. We started with you a little bit late, so don't try and, we've got plenty of time for Q&A at the end. I don't want you to short shrift our attendees at all, so don't sweat about that, okay?
Oh, thank you, Mark. But if you do at any point need to jump in and cut me off, which you might have to do, don't hesitate to do that. But thank you very much. I won't rush through to get done at 11:20 right on the button. Thank you.
Thank you.
One last word about design. Oops. Sorry, y'all. I got too excited about going right on. One last thing to consider about design, and there are so many things, as I said, and design is not my wheelhouse. That's why you co-author with someone whose wheelhouse it's in. But something else from the bee standpoint is that, you know, we always say size matters. And in this case, what we're really talking about is tongue length. You probably don't know or care about different lengths of tongues on bees, but I will tell you that in fact, some bees are long-tongued and some bees are short-tongued. And so if you have a favorite pollinator or type of pollinator that you would really like to attract to your garden, that's something that might influence your design and the plants that you select for your garden. For example, long-tongued bees like bumblebees, which are also native bees, and we have so many beautiful, wonderful bumblebees in our environment, especially here in North Carolina. Bumblebees are long-tongued bees. So think about plants that have, or flowers, excuse me, that have a tubular or trumpet shape to them. A few examples here I'm using are snapdragons or columbine. These are going to be more often frequented by bumblebees and other native bees that have long tongues. And it makes sense, right? The nectar that they're going for are way down in the bottom of this tube, and so they have to land on it. And if they're too big to crawl in, then they have to use their long tongue to access that nectar. Short-tongued bees, and in fact flies and beetles also fall in this category, prefer what we call open face flowers. And I have 3 examples of those right here. And I'll just mention I did in fact take all these pictures, and I use that as a great excuse to get outside on days I'm just tired of sitting at my desk. So we have the purple coneflower here at the top. We have the beautiful annual cosmos here, the orange one in the middle. And then down on the bottom, we have that gaillardia or blanket flower that I mentioned earlier. All of those make wonderful bee habitat. And they are most, well, here you can see they're all being frequented by a honeybee, but any small native bee would also prefer these open face flowers. All right, now's the time for everyone to get their pen out and their garden notebook and be ready to take some notes. I'm not going to stop on any of these slides for a terribly long period of time. I know that Mark said that he would make these slides available, so you're welcome to refer back to the slides after the presentation. And also, I have a very small handout with just sort of a quick cheat sheet of my 10 favorite pollinator plants. And so be sure that you visit that handout or ask to receive it if you haven't yet so that you know my very favorite pollinator plants in our landscape. But I am going to go through a few of my favorites. And because people always say, well, what are your top 5 favorites? It's so hard to pick my top 5 favorite plants, because are they my top 5 favorite plants in the spring? Are they my top 5 annual plants? Are they my top 5 plants that host caterpillars? I can't pick 5. It's like picking a favorite child. Although, to be fair, I do have a favorite child. But my son is an only child, so I'm allowed to make that joke. Okay. So in the springtime, one of the very first plants that we have blooming that offer habitat and forage for our native early pollinators and honeybees, if they're in the area, are what are called Zizia golden Alexanders. And they're actually shown in both of these pictures that aren't the Aquilegia, the columbine. They're that yellow flower. And that I'll mention that the golden Alexanders are not only one of the earliest plants that we have that come out and bloom here in North Carolina, they're also a native plant, and they make a wonderful host, as you can see, for swallowtail caterpillars. Now, a word about host plants, and I don't talk much about that later in the talk, but I will mention now that if you're planting plants for host plants, typically for caterpillars, please be aware that when you plant those plants, they are going to be defoliated. What do caterpillars eat? Anybody? Anybody? They eat the leaves of your plants. So if you want to put in plants that are going to be host plants for those caterpillars, I totally commend that. And that's a wonderful thing to do. Most years I put in dill, and I just say that it's for the caterpillars because I don't harvest any. They just get eaten by the caterpillars. So keep that in mind. And if you're going to plant the golden Alexanders, you probably will in fact get swallowtail larvae caterpillars on your golden Alexander. So plant quite a few, and that way you can share. They also make really beautiful combinations. If you're thinking artistically and about colors, you can see here that the golden Alexanders are mixed with the red yarrow and the lance leaf blanket flower. This will be later in the season, of course, because right now yarrow and blanket flower are not going to be blooming. Another early bloomer is the native wild columbine. I have a ton of this in my yard. If anyone wants some, I am putting out the call to you right now. You are welcome to some of my eastern wild columbine. I have tons in my yard, and it's a beautiful, hardy native and an early bloomer. So again, we talk about seasonality. We want to have things that can bloom early spring, mid-spring, late spring, summer, fall, late fall, as much opportunity for those bees to be foraging and surviving and thriving as we can have. So one of my late spring that will carry into the summer favorites is Asclepias. Any species, you pick one, they're all wonderful. They don't all do well, particularly in certain areas. Some of them need good drainage in their soil. Some of them don't care. Some can transplant well, some seed well. Really, any way you can get the Asclepias into your yard, I would say make sure you're planting them. One of the things that Asclepias offer for pollinators is the nectar. And that nectar is especially good for honeybees and other native bees. But if you're a big honeybee fan, this is one of the best flowers. And of course, this Asclepias tuberosa, the orange one here that's featured, is actually called butterfly weed because it's a tremendous butterfly pollinator plant. And so if you plant these, you will get butterflies. They like that nectar a lot. So late spring, summer, these will even bloom into fall. The Gaillardia, you've heard me mention a few times, blanket flower or lance leaf blanket flower, prairie Gaillardia. There are a number of different species. They all grow very, very well in North Carolina, as well as south of here, a little bit north of here, and west of here, all the way out to California, in fact. They are also really nice in your environment, particularly if you're at the coast or in the sand hills, because they tolerate hot and dry conditions. And in my opinion, in all the years I've been doing pollinator research, these are some of the easiest flowers to establish Whether you're buying it from seed or you're buying them in pots and planting them, they are perennials. Sometimes they grow as annuals, but they reseed very nicely. This is a really easy plant to grow. I think it's high impact because of the color. And you can see here it's beloved by bees and butterflies alike. Continuing late spring, summer into fall. Another one of my very, very favorites is the echinacea, a purple coneflower. They're, of course, native types as well as bred cultivars. You can see an orange one here, one of my favorites. Actually, I think that picture was the cover of our book. Rudbeckia is also a very nice one, seen here in yellow, also called black-eyed Susans. And then not a native plant, but an herbaceous plant that can be quite useful not only in cooking, but also provides nectar and pollen all the way from summer into the fall is this borage. It can be a really lovely plant to include, and that really bright blue flower makes it a eye-popping color in your garden. So late into summer, there are a lot of choices. Here are a few favorites. I know that the Stokes aster is a favorite here in North Carolina. The agastache, which grows tall and skinny. I often see all types of bees, wasps, beetles, butterflies, flies on the agastache in our garden, sometimes all at the same time. I don't think that it's often thought of as eye-catching, but for me, when it's in full bloom and it has all those pollinators on it, I can't take my eyes off it. Walker's mint, catmint, butterflies especially really like that, but bees of all types like it as well. Again, it's an exotic, not a native. And then Mark mentioned earlier the pycnanthum, the mountain mint is a little white flower, but it gets tall and bushy. And it's also a really beautiful native that we grow here that bees of all types love. It's also really hard to kill. I have a patch of that in my yard, and my chickens have managed to kill everything in that little herb garden, except for my mountain mint, which has just resisted the attack of my hens. Moving summer into fall, Rudbeckia, as I already mentioned, the brown-eyed Susan or black-eyed Susan, Monarda, which is bee balm. You can get it in a variety of different colors. If you're planting Monarda, you want to make sure you're planting it in a high sun area. It is prone to getting leaf diseases, and the reason they get them is if there's too much shade or too much moisture on their leaves. So those are going to benefit from those high sun areas. And then the sunflower is hard to pass up, right? Sunflowers of all different types can be grown as annuals. You can grow them in pots. You can seed them around your mailbox, in your garden. They're just beautiful, and sunflowers just make me happy. So I would encourage you to plant sunflowers. Summer into fall. Again, asters are one of my favorites. You can get so many types and so many colors. They mound up. Some can be short mounders. Some can get quite tall. So make sure that when you're picking an aster, which I highly recommend that you add to your garden because it brings bees and pollinators of all types to your yard, I would encourage you to make sure that you're paying very careful attention to how tall those might get. Again, they're mounders, but asters are one of my very favorite late summer into fall pollinator species. And goldenrod, actually, it makes a really nice partner when you're thinking about design. It blooms at the same time as these asters, and so you can have these really bright purple or bright blue asters, and then you can have the solidago or goldenrod in the foreground. Also another wonderful pollinator plant. Joe pieweed and ironweed. You know, I grew up on a farm, and we had these, we considered them weeds in our horse pasture. But now, and they can grow quite tall, sometimes 6 or 7 feet tall, and they might be quite unruly for a garden. But there are now varieties that you can find that are quite short in stature, and so that's something to think about. These are really nice because they're really late summer, fall bloomers where you don't often have a lot of other things still blooming in your garden. One of my other favorites, and this is in the sunflower family, these are Helianthus. These are also native to North Carolina. They do well in wet areas. But one thing to remember about these plants is they do get very, very tall. So if you're planting them, make sure that they have something to lean on, like a fence, or that you plant them in the back of your yard or back of the garden so that they're not overwhelming the foreground of your beautifully designed pollinator garden. I'm going to go quite rapidly now through the last couple of my plant slides. I just have two more, maybe three more recommendations for plant slides, but I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. I don't think that it would be fair of me not to talk about trees and shrubs, since I just had Basil on here talking about the importance of trees, and I couldn't agree more. So some of our North Carolina native trees and shrubs make the absolute best forage, especially early in the spring. So eastern redbud, and you see them here in green, and the red maple are two of the earliest bloomers in our landscape in North Carolina. They're very, very important for those early pollinators that are trying to brave the cold and come out. Other excellent trees and shrubs that you might consider adding to your landscape are here, including sourwood, sumac, and tulip poplar. Again, depending on your landscape or the area that you have. Some of our native shrubs are wonderful. I apologize, I cut this word honey off. I don't know how that happened. Clethra is one of my very favorites. It has those really nice dark green leathery leaves and the really beautiful spikes of flowers. The bees just love it because it's loaded with nectar. All right, my top 5 favorite plants. Everyone always asks me this. Again, I've already prefaced it with, how can you pick your top 5 favorites? They're all wonderful. But if I were just recommending 5 plants for your yard because you wanted to start a pollinator garden, but you wanted to make sure that you had time to manage it, maintain it, and water it, which is all very important, not just the planting, right? You can't just quit after you put it in the ground. These would be my top 5 favorites. But this is in the handout, so I'm going to keep moving. And I've already talked about all of them. They're all just beautiful. Okay, just a few last things to consider. Remember, more diversity of plants in your landscape means a more diversity of pollinators in your landscape. You want plants that bloom early spring all the way into late fall if you have the chance, the opportunity, and the space to do that. Something to consider is though hybrid flowers can be really, really beautiful in your landscape. Dahlias are a great example. They're just stunning and they can be, dinner plate sized, and they're definitely showstoppers. But those plants with the doubled flowers do not make good pollinator habitat or forage. And that's in part because the way that they're bred, often those stamens that were supposed to produce pollen have actually been bred to actually produce petals. And so they don't produce a lot of pollen. And what little pollen they do produce is really hard for the bees to get to. So if you're leaning into that pollinator habitat, maybe skip those beautiful dinner plate sized dahlias and reach for an echinacea instead. Don't forget larval host plants if you don't mind a little frass and some caterpillars in your yard. As I mentioned, ZZ is a great one. Herbs make really wonderful pollinator habitat, as does milkweed, for those host plants for caterpillars. Provide some nesting structures. You might plant some warm season grasses. Grasses, of course, are not fed on by pollinators, but they are used as habitat. So maybe grab a switchgrass or a blue stem and plant that in your yard as well. And then last but not least, we recommend if you're trying to plant for pollinators, we would encourage you not to use pesticides or herbicides of any kind in your yard. I'm not anti-pesticide as a rule, but when you're planting for your family, for your pollinators, you want them to be as healthy and safe as possible. So it's just best to skip those pesticides. And I believe Basil mentioned that as well. So in closing, no matter what your yard looks like, no matter what size area you have, no matter how crazy or how many things you want to add to your area and your habitat, or how small, there's no garden too small or landscape too large to include pollinator habitat. Together, we can help protect our pollinator friends, and maybe we can inspire someone else to do it with us along the way. So last but not least, my very favorite part of the talk is that our publishers have agreed to allow us to give out 3 advanced copies of our book, which we just published. And you can see I've got my advanced copy right here in my hot little hands that covers everything and more that I just talked about today. And so if you are on Twitter and you want to give us a shout out, at UNC Press is our publisher, at NC State Hort is the folks that pay our paycheck, and our hashtag is no garden too small for pollinators. So give us a tweet, tell us what you love, tell us what you want more of, and we're going to draw 2 names out of that tweet pool, and we're going to send you guys each a book, right? We're going to give away 3. I know not everyone is on Twitter or has the interest or inclination, so if you'd still like to be in the drawing for a book, sign Mark's guest book. Mark, do you mind just dropping that in the chat? And I'm going to ask Mark or Chris to just draw a name straight out of that guest book. We're going to reach out to you. We're going to ask you for your information, and my publisher is going to send you one of my books. Lastly, if you are not comfortable with any of those things, but you still want to be in the drawing, or you just want to share something that you loved or you want more information, just drop me an email. My email is right here. You can also find me at NC State. I'm the only one with my name here, I promise. So without further ado, I'll say thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today, and go outside and plant some of those flowers, and let's feed the bees.
Fantastic. Thank you, Denisha. That was great. We have got a lot of questions, so we'll get to that. We'll get to those just a second. I want to have a couple of things to mention. One, this whole program is the result of a lot of hard work from folks like Chris Glenn, who does our education program, to all the folks who've been answering questions and monitoring chats and promoting it. Catherine Ball, Doug Ruin, Tim Alderton, Arlene Calhoun, Dennis Carey, just everybody. You can see them on here. They've been really on the ball and fantastic at making this happen and making all of our online programming happen. We're very committed to this online programming. We will continue it even once everything is back to normal, because we're finding so many people are really interested in this. Today we had 4 times as many people participate as we could have had if we were live. And we can do that because we have fantastic members. I would love to encourage all of y'all to consider being a member. We have great programs. In 2 weeks on Saturday, we're going to have our winter symposium, which is going to be a lot of fun. Eat, drink, and be merry. Chocolate tequila in the intersection of plants and people. It's going to be a lot of fun. You can go to our website and sign up for that. But do encourage you to consider being a member, because that's really how we stay open and keep doing these things. Again, want to thank Leaf and Limb for sponsoring this particular program. There also will be an evaluation that gets dropped into the chat so that you can evaluate this program. We can make it even better for y'all. So now I'm going to get into some questions. Let's see. The question, well, I'll answer this real quick. How can I buy your book not on Amazon? Go straight to UNC Press and you can pre-order it. It comes out in March, but you can pre-order it now from UNC Press.
I'll drop the link in the chat, Mark, if that's okay.
Perfect. There's some of the questions kind of interact with all 3 of y'all. So let me start doing those with some mulch. There are a lot of mulch questions. Concern about how deep should you do your mulch? Can you do it too deep? How do you mulch under trees? What does that do for the ground pollinators?
That is all 3.
Yes.
Well, in general, just general mulching, not trees notwithstanding or anything like that, you don't need but 2 to 4 inches of mulch. You don't need to go 6 or 8 or 12 inches of mulch. The mulch is supposed to ameliorate the temperatures and the water going through and reduce the water loss. And so you just need, what you need is the spaces in between these particles which act as the barrier. It's not the barrier itself, the material, it's the spaces in between that's important. And so you don't need but 2 to 4 inches of that material. If it is a coarse material, you can put a little bit deeper if you'd like. But if it's fine material, it will tend to slow down gas exchange if it gets too deep. And of course, if you're talking about, I'm not talking about trees or whatever, that's a whole nother story when you're underneath trees. And I won't speak to that per se. We'll let Basil talk about that.
Can I throw something in here? Something I tell people, and I want to get y'all's opinion on this, is here in the South, especially where we're not worried about frost heaving and things like that, is I tell people their mulch should be thick enough to keep light from hitting the ground so annual weed seeds don't germinate, but thin enough, but as thin as you can get it other than that, just for mulching purposes, because that will keep the soil keep moisture at that mulch soil interface, which is what you want. You don't want if your mulch is too thick and stays wet, the weed seeds just grow in it. But if your mulch dries out, but under that it stays moist. So what do y'all think with that? And we've got a lot of questions, so we'll try and hit these pretty quickly. Basil, you have any thoughts? And then Dinesh,
one really important thing about mulches, y'all, with trees, especially the triple shreds, they tend to get what's called hydrophobic on the top. It's just a fancy term for waterproof. So if you're going to use your designer mulches, triple shreds, double shreds, a lot of that, then you do need to go out there every 6 months, use a potato hoe or something to turn it over, because otherwise it'll start actually repelling water. You won't have that problem with wood chips. I recognize not everybody wants wood chips, so just watch out for waterproof mulch.
And I'll just mention in terms of the bees actually prefer areas that are sunny to make their nest areas. And so if you're under a tree, particularly if it's quite shady, you don't have to worry about the bees in those areas.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask the rest of my staff to help me out with some of the questions, because there are a lot of them, and I want to hit the ones that kind of are things people kept coming back to. There have been several questions again about soil mulches and soil additives, bagged products. People are concerned with heavy metals in them or other toxicities. Any thoughts on that?
Well, heavy metals can be a concern in mulches. But what it usually stems from are people have been using pressure treated wood that has the old type it had cadmium and arsenic and copper in it if you kept it in the board form, it's perfectly fine, but if you grind it up, it leaches out and gets into the soil. And so if you're not careful in your mulch selection, you could have people throwing away their old fences or their old decks. There's about 1 billion board feet of this material that's still out there. They've changed the way that they impregnate the material now, so they don't use the same thing. It's more copper than anything else. But there's a bunch of it out there, and it can be a problem. And in fact, we've shown when we did a survey of mulches, we find anywhere from 10 to 40% of the samples that we get would have had some of this material in it. And this was 10 years ago. Even though all the box stores and all the people that have made people sign things that they say we don't carry that in there, indeed some of it does get in. Now, not to be self-serving, but certified material by the Mulch and Soil Council have all been tested for that, and they test specifically for heavy metals in this material. And so if you get certified material, then you don't tend to have that at all. If you get fresh material, and if it's bark-based mostly, then you don't have to worry about it. But a lot of mulches today are wood-based, and I'm not saying that those are bad. They take trees and they just shred the whole thing and they turn them into mulch. I mean, they make good mulches, provided they're regular trees. But if the process, if they grind up any of these old materials. They should be separated. They should not be in the process. But it's problematic. If you've got mulches that have square edges, then that could be wood that might have been pressure treated, certainly from old lumber and things like that. So it's not as big a concern today as it used to be. But if you're concerned about it, you can check with the manufacturers, or just check to see if they are actually certified materials.
Or just get leaves. Everybody throws them by their curb every year. They're free. There's tons of them out there. I collect all my neighbors' leaves every year for mulch. And then you can also get wood chips. And I know that's not going to work everywhere, but there's a lot of times where there's free carbon, free mulches out there, where maybe, I love this, and I'll just say it again from earlier, but you get your leaves, get your wood chips underneath, and if you want that designer look, you can put a little sprinkling of pine straw on the top or something like that.
Yeah. And when you get those chips from, chipdrop.com or one of those groups, like from something from Basil or from another arborist, those guys are not throwing old lumber through their chippers to screws and things like that that'll ruin their equipment. They're not doing that, so you won't get that. I will say though, I have seen at a local big box store bags of very cheap mulch called No Float Cypress, I think they're calling it. And if you look in there, sometimes you can see painted pieces of lumber. That stuff everything is going through there, so you want to be really careful about that. There's a question about Carolina jessamine. Is that really toxic to bees?
That's a question I've only gotten once before, and I really need to do a little bit more literature searching on it, but I do not believe that it is actually toxic to bees. But I am kind of caught on my back foot right now. But I think that I think that's an urban myth. I don't think that it's toxic to bees.
You're right. It's not toxic. I happen to know that one.
Good. Thank you. It takes a team effort, doesn't it? There's so much to remember.
Yeah, there's just information all over the place about that. There's a question about, you talked a lot about plants that do well in sun for pollinators. Not everybody has sun or well-drained soils. There were a couple that our staff put in there, like buttonbush, white bracted sedge, the Rhynchospora, Ilex glabra, Ilex verticillata, Eryngium, Stokesia. Do you have any other thoughts on that? Or did I just rail off all the easy ones for you?
For shade-loving pollinator plants?
Shade or moisture.
Hellebores, one of my very, very favorites. In fact, mine are blooming right now. They make great bee habitat. I'm trying to think. I have a whole list, and I didn't have time to talk about them today. But hellebores are one of my favorites, and some of the others that you mentioned, Mark. But if anyone wants my entire list of shade-loving pollinator plants, they're welcome to email me.
Okay, while I have an expert on, again, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to say something that I tell people all the time, and I'm willing to take an online recorded correction having to do with pollinators. We have beehives at the Arboretum, and some people put sugar water out during the winter for their bees because there's nothing flowering. We don't do that. Our beekeeper takes honey off the hives during the winter. And that's because we have so much flowering. And I often tell people, if they want to support the bees and the wildlife, to concentrate less on the lists, not to say that there's anything wrong with the list when you really want to help them out, but to plant a wide diversity of plants, because we can take honey off our beehives during the winter because we have something in flower like hellebores all year round. There is something flowering every single day here. And if it's warm, as it is often in the South in the middle of winter, the bees are out and are active.
So I agree. Again, I'm not a beekeeper, right? My area is horticulture and plants for bees. But I think that most beekeepers feel comfortable supplementing with sugar water, but I think the old school beekeepers say that it's not necessary and it can actually be damaging to the hive. I think everyone has to understand, if they're going to supplement, it's because they don't have other forage available. So I what I would recommend is, I don't want to say, well, don't supplement your bees. I don't want anybody's bees to starve, but what I would say is just plant, your very favorite plants from a list or just from what you've seen blooming in the landscape, and then you don't have to supplement your bees with sugar water.
Yeah. My question was less about the supplementing and more about the importance of planting a diversity.
Oh, well,
don't work, but other things will.
I tell people it's a lot like if I gave my son the option of eating ice cream or French fries every day for, a year, would he choose that? Yes, he probably would. Would it be good for him? No, it would not. It's the same with the bees, right? The more diverse flowers and plants that you have that provide habitat and forage, the better healthy your bees are going to be, the better healthy your landscape is going to be.
And the same is true for trees. That diversity is so key. When you have a canopy, you really do want a diversity of species, understory, overstory. And I'll also add that when it comes to trees, we don't want to forget that trees and shrubs are huge pollinators too. Oaks and tulip flowers, all these other trees that we see every day, thousands of bees are feeding from those during the right times of the year. We just can't see it as easily because it's so high up.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth mentioning that we're talking about pollinators quite a bit, but the big overstory trees, the smaller understory, the shrubs, the perennials also provide food for other critters, birds, mammals, and habitat for those. And that was, Dinesh mentioned that some, that, you want to leave some of those grasses and stalks of plants, those little hollow stalks of plants, we leave them up for the birds to eat the seeds at the top, but really in those stems, we have solitary bees sometimes are in there. So, don't be too clean with all of your garden. Maybe have some areas where you don't clean up from winter so early. Speaking of critters, there's a question about voles in mulch. Thoughts on that?
You said voles?
Yes.
Well, there's a couple of things about mulches about that. Voles, and the other question I get is termites sometimes as issues. And you can have both in mulches. If the mulch is pretty thick, you tend to have more of those. And the recommendation for mulches, as far as termites are concerned, is to leave a gap between, you don't mulch up against to the side of your house, because if you do that, then the termites can literally go from the mulch right into the house itself. So you always leave a small gap, anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 inches away from the actual house itself for your mulches, and then you won't have that in there. And also, voles tend to stay a little more, I tend to have bigger problem if you till your garden up, and if you till up your entire yard. I didn't have voles in my yard until I tilled up 6 inches my entire yard, and then everything was soft and smushy, and then I made more space for them. So you do have to be careful in this process. You can get some voles in there, so I would just be careful but it's not necessarily a major issue, and neither are termites that much in that same thing.
And if you leave some good healthy trees around those hawks, they love the voles.
Well, and if you have cats or hawks, birds like that, you feed them really easily. So.
Yeah. So I want to thank, we've had a couple people who've already come in with memberships who've been participating. So I do want to thank those folks. Let's see.
Dennis has posted a question in the Q&A from YouTube, Mark. He has said it's for Bill. Someone would like to have him address the value of sheet mulching versus tilling the organic matter in. I guess pluses and minuses for both.
Well, what I didn't say was, if we use the term no-till, no-tilling in a garden is not an issue or question. No-till for farming is saving your soil. And so the thing about no-till is, on agriculture, is you're saving soil, because every time you turn it over, you're blowing it away. and you're losing it. And since it takes so long to make soil, anytime you disturb it, you can lose it. And when you're doing hundreds and thousands of acres, that could be a problem. But in your soil, number one, you don't actually have soil. You have subsoil to start with. Two, you're trying to build it. So incorporating into it and tilling that over is not a bad or an unsustainable practice. In fact, you don't have good soil, so you're trying to make it. So tilling it initially, in my mind, there's no issues as far as saving the planet or being a bad practice. However, putting sheet mulch down and not going into the soil works just as well. And if you do, it just takes a little longer. You can still grow in it. Your mulch is your soil system's about this deep, and you can plant in it. You just don't plant right away in it. You wait over through the winter, the fall and the winter, and you pull the mulch back a little bit, and then you plant directly in it, and you can work. It's simply a labor-saving device, and there are a lot of people that love to garden, that particularly as you get older, you can't. You don't have quite the same month you had when you were in your 20s and 30s. So it's a very viable practice. I wouldn't have recommended it 20 years ago, but then I didn't know much about it. But today, putting it on top in an area is relatively easy. It's a quick way to do it, and there's nothing there. It's not a bad practice in any way, shape, or form. So it just gives you another option for that. And if you put some sides around that sheet mulching type of thing, you've got a raised bed. And raised beds are always good. So what I'm saying is you got many different options to it. I just wouldn't take a tree and put it on top, because you're just asking for problems. So you've got to go to the regular arboricultural practice of planting trees in the proper way. But for everything else, either one actually works, and they work both very well.
And I would also add a nice little application of this is if you do have trees and shrubs in your yard and you want to do a quick mulch ring around those, we're all getting tons of boxes from Amazon. Take off that packaging tape, open up the boxes, lay it down around the tree or the shrub, put your mulch on top, and now you get free weed control for a while, 6 months or so, and you're getting that mulch established. And now you're well on your way to what Bill's talking about, building that healthy soil ecosystem, and you get the weed control.
Right. And the thing that I loved about the sheet mulching is the question, when people ask about, how do I improve my soil? They're always told, till up 6 inches, put the organic matter in, do all that. Well, most gardeners, and I include myself in there, you move into a new house. You want to start gardening, you're furnishing the house, or, you're young or whatever, and you don't have the disposable income or the time. You may have young kids to do all that. And so you start planting, or you have a wooded lot already. And all of a sudden, 10 years later, you're like, I wish I had done more with my soil, but it's all planted. I can't till everything up. I've got roots. The sheet mulching you can do over and around existing plants and build soil in existing beds. Sometimes you may need to dig up perennials or things to raise their level. You need to make sure you're not piling up around the tree trunks and things like Basil mentioned, and that goes for the shrubs as well. But it's a way to come into an existing garden and go. There was a couple questions about wood products. One, and probably we can have two different people answer. One was about bee houses. Do you want to be careful about what you're using for bee houses in terms of wood, lumber, and same for raised beds? So Dinesh, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. You don't want to use treated wood, right? And so when I'm building bee houses, I usually just go sort of forage in the detritus in my backyard. I have a number of oak trees, living here in Raleigh, we have a lot of oak trees that drop twigs and stems, and we usually just use those. But I think, Bill and Basil probably know more about the treated lumber, but I just know that you're not supposed to use treated lumber for raised beds because of the heavy metals, I guess. And I would agree, don't use treated lumber for bee houses either.
Well, in raised beds, treated lumber in itself is not necessarily a damaging process as long as you don't grind it up. You can take treated lumber, particularly the ones that are treated today, which are mostly a copper material rather than have arsenic in it. And as long as you keep them whole, you can make fence posts out of them, and you can use them that way, and they still work fine. The problem is when you grind that stuff up. So if you use old railroad ties, for example, they've been treated with some really nasty stuff in the old days. So making raised beds, treated lumber isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. And if you put up sides, in other words, they're going to eventually break down if you don't do that. So I'm not opposed to treated lumber as long as you're not grinding up the materials when you get done. You need to dispose of them, and you can still take those to special places when you get done with them and use them. It's only when you grind them up. So don't cut them. I mean, don't cut them and break them all apart and then use any of that. That's never a good sign.
Well, thanks, Bill. It just goes to show you learn something new every day.
Well, they still use treated lumber in marine applications and everything else, and they're all very conscious about what the issues are. And when you start measuring these levels, you find out that as long as it stays in the board, no one says treated lumber is a bad thing. It's the disposing of treated lumber that's always the bad thing, and that's the biggest issue.
All right. Is there anything that that comes to mind for any of you from these questions, or from something somebody else talked about that that you want to add that we may have missed?
My one kind of final parting comment is, I think, there's a lot of inspiration we can get just by looking at nature. I think oftentimes if you're in doubt about what to do, go find that ecosystem nearby. There are woods and fields, and these habitats exist everywhere, and they do great without human intervention. They don't need chemicals. They don't need us fussing about. Messy is not a bad thing. I mean, these are how landscapes work. So look to the forest and look to the fields and look to ecosystems for inspiration on how to go about doing a healthy landscape.
Oh, absolutely. And to that point, the things we talked about building soils is not that you're taking something that's actually natural and doing it better, because we've actually removed that natural stuff that's been there for a long time, and now we have to make something better. My last thought about incorporation, and the sheet stuff is great, raised beds are stuff, but if you're going to till materials in, part of the issue is tillers sometimes are expensive and you don't have it. But I will tell you that it is great to own a tiller, but the thing that's actually better than having your own tiller is having a neighbor with a tiller. And everybody that has a tiller is more than happy to help, because they don't use it very often. And so I used to help people. I say, no, you can't just borrow my tiller, but I'll come and till it up for you, because I just like to use it. So find your neighbors with them. And gardeners are always happy to help each other. So I think it's just a wonderful thing.
Thank you all so much. This has been amazing. I would really encourage everybody to check out these resources. NC State University has just a wealth of resources on pollinators, on soils, real national leaders. I mentioned before, Leaf and Limb, their website and their newsletter is phenomenal. It really is good. I really, you can sense the love for what they're doing through their website at Leaf and Limb. I want to thank them again for sponsoring us. Denisha also has the book coming out, pre-order through UNC Press. It's fantastic. I've seen some early bits of it. I can't wait to get my own. We do have a link for the evaluation form. Please give that to us. We love to get better. Our speakers all love to get better. Love that. Check our website for upcoming programs. We have a lot that's happening online, for adults, for kids. It's amazing. Especially our winter symposium is going to be big fun in two weeks from now. We just don't have time for all of the questions, but Leaf and Limb, they're great about answering things. I send questions to Basil all the time. Denisha and Bill are just like everybody at NC State in the horticulture department. They are there the students are what people think about, but they are dedicated to the idea of extension through land grant universities, and they will answer questions and help you out. There's a list of everybody on there, so please join that. And thank you to the folks who joined today and who have joined recently, and thanks to those of you who have been members for a long time. We all appreciate you. I know we hit at some point pretty close to 600 between Zoom and YouTube. So y'all have really spread the word widely. So thanks again, everybody. And we look forward to talking with all the participants down the road. Thanks, guys. Now get out and garden. What I'm going to do.
Thank you, Mark. That was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Yep. Worked out well. Big crowd. I mean, I've spoken to 500 people before, and I can't, in person, no one can see. I mean, who can see a slide, in a huge, so for a large group like this is wonderful. This is great. So, and thanks a lot. And Chris, thank you so much for your help. This was great. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bill.
And I'm going to talk to you, Mark, about gardening on the coast, because in June I'm retiring and I'm moving to Corpus Christi, Texas, moving back home, and I'm going to be near the island, so I'm going to be on the coast. I need to talk about gardening on the coast for sure.
Yeah, well, that's going to I know we got some folks that you've been training up and mentoring and to help fill the shoes, but that's going to leave a big hole in the department when you do retire.
Well, like I said, we've got course-wise, we're working on filling that up, but the rest of it with Chippy, I think we're going to be in good shape. So, thanks again.
Thank you,
gentlemen.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, team. Y'all did a fantastic job, everybody. And goodbye.